Chapter 1675. At that moment, the Moon Empress felt rather complicated. For a person who was used to keeping a low profile, he suddenly became high profile. Courage was required to do so. So far in the world, no one had mentioned the definition of a Class 6 Creation Master. The Moon Empress felt that it wasn't because there weren't any Creation Masters in the world that had reached this stage. Before he became the third Class 5 Creation Master of the Radiance sect, the Azure Federation already had 3 Class 5 Creation Masters. The Freedom Federation had 4 Class 5 Creation Masters. Furthermore, there was a clear Class 5 Creation Masters legacy. In the early years, Hui Yao only had 2 Class 5 Creation Masters. The concept of 3 great federations had yet to be fully established. It was the Moon Empress who had ascended to become a Class 5 Creation Master. After the Radiance Federation announced the third Class 5 Creation Master on the surface, the Radiance Federation had the same number of Class 5 Creation Masters as the Azure Federation. Only then did the Origin world have the concept of 3 great federations. The Azure Federation was a family-style federation. It was different from the Freedom Federation and the Radiance Federation. In the Azure Federation, there was no concept of an overlord. The patriarchs of the 12 great Azure families were the common masters of the Azure Federation. In such a family-style federation, as long as a family had a Class 5 Creation Master on the surface, they would be able to take over the federation. If someone in the family became a Class 5 Creation Master, they would usually hide it as a secret trump card. The Freedom Federation, in terms of overall strength, it was slightly stronger than the Radiance Federation and the Azure Federation. In the early years, he had 4 Class 5 Creation Masters. In the past 150 years, because of the internal strife, moreover, 2 Class 5 Creation Masters had perished. Therefore, even though the Moon Empress' strength had increased tremendously, she still couldn't control it. He still hadn't underestimated the Freedom Federation. Furthermore, the Moon Empress felt that according to her star rating, it would be better to use the star rating. It wasn't as if the Freedom Federation didn't have anyone that could reach the standard of a Class 6 Creation Master. The Moon Empress had raised the concept of Class 6 Creation Masters in the Origin world by herself. This was tantamount to gathering the attention of the entire Origin world on him. This wouldn't benefit the Moon Empress at all. However, he would do so in a month. On one hand, it was extremely beneficial to Hui Yao. Right now, the Radiance Federation and the Freedom Federation were wrestling. The Moon Empress needed to give the other High Lords and even Quan Hui Yao a reassurance pill. Otherwise, if the Moon Empress wanted to hide her Class 6 Creation Master abilities, she wouldn't be able to do so. He would not be able to provide Creation Master resources to the other 12 eminences. The other 12 majesties were not fools. Once the Moon Empress used her ability that surpassed that of a Class 5 Creation Master, she would be able to defeat the Moon Empress. The other party would be able to sense it very soon. By then, the news of him becoming a Class 6 Creation Master would naturally be exposed. Rather than that, it would be better for the Moon Empress to make a public statement. Unless the Moon Empress wasn't going to give any Creation Master resources to the other eminences. Only this way, the other eminences wouldn't know that the Moon Empress had become a Class 6 Creation Master. However, the Origin world was on the brink of an upheaval. The Moon Empress had to step forward and increase the strength of the other majesties. Only in this way could Hui Yao survive the turmoil of the Origin world, to become the everlasting mountains and rivers. On the other hand, with the development of Sky City's forces. In addition, Lin Yuan had taken out the Golden Lotus Brocade plant, various ordinary Class 5 Creation Masters, and even the Moon Empress herself. Something that could not be cultivated. Lin Yuan was still in the growth stage. In terms of overall strength, even if they could fight above their level, they would still have the battle prowess of an emperor. But at the end of the day, he was just a B-rank Spirit Chi professional with a peak fantasy breed Fae. A Spirit Chi professional could not be considered a King-class expert without reaching A rank. Therefore, instead of letting the other Federation's people focus their attention on Lin Yuan, it was better to let them all fall on her. Right now, even if the Moon Empress was facing the Freedom Federation's 3 self-proclaimed gods, she could also be fearless. The Freedom Federation's 3 self-proclaimed gods. They only relied on 11-star sacred source lifeforms. 10-star sacred source lifeforms could trigger astronomical phenomena. 11-star sacred source lifeforms could already turn astronomical phenomena into a function for their own use. This ability was indeed no different from the traditional definition of God. Coincidentally, with Lin Yuan's help, the Moon Empress was able to call herself God. Now, she also had the qualifications to call herself God. However, the Moon Empress did not plan to call herself Moon God. The Moon Empress defined a Class 6 Creation Master for Hui Yao, the first below Khanate beings. It was also to protect her disciples' safety as a master. These 2 responsibilities drove the Moon Empress. She made a choice that went against her character. As for her strength, the Moon Empress planned to remain the same as before. She would only show it when it was necessary. She listened to the other Her Majesties congratulating her. The Moon Empress nodded in response. The Moon Empress could not help but think of the pure spirit Qi that Lin Yuan had provided for her. The pure spirit Qi had allowed the Moon Empress to awaken her life providence. After awakening her life providence, she had taken another step forward. It was because of this step. It allowed the Moon Empress to have a new understanding of life. It allowed the Moon Empress to have another opportunity to improve her creation master standard. However, after the Moon Empress's creation master standard had improved, she went to mix the spirit Qi. She found that the spirit Qi that she had used all her strength to mix was still of a lower purity. It was still a little less pure than the spirit roast peony that Lin Yuan had given her. Class 1 to Class 5 Creation Masters had a clear classification of stars. Each star had an iconic measurement standard. However, these measurement standards were just man-made. It was just like how the Moon Empress had designated the purification of eternal power from the eternal heart image as the measurement standard for a Class 6 Creation Master. But different paths led to the same goal. The standards of a Creation Master really needed to be meticulously classified. A Creation Master's ability to compare. In the end, it was just a competition of who could mix a higher concentration of Spirit Qi. After all, Spirit Qi was everything. It was the foundation for phase to evolve and mutate. The Moon Empress had already evaluated Lin Yuan's creation master strength in her heart. Lin Yuan was clearly her disciple. However, the Moon Empress felt that Lin Yuan's ability as a creation master. It had already exceeded her understanding. Moreover, Lin Yuan had used a special method to control a Class 5 Creation Master. This Class 5 Creation Master was the culprit that had caused the destruction of the whale ocean trade, Di Wanmi. Even if Di Wanmi had just become a Class 5 Creation Master. In terms of pure spirit Qi, he might be weaker than veteran Class 5 Creation Masters like the Chef Supreme and the Bamboo Monarch. However, purifying the power of willpower from the willpower rune, purifying the power of law from the law rune, purifying the power of world from the world crystal, purifying the power of immortality from the immortal body was very easy. At the same time, he could also use the bodies of dead sacred source lifeforms to refine artifact. For Di Wanmi, who was already a Class 5 Creation Master. It was just a matter of reaching out. Chapter 1676. A month before the Moon Empress went into seclusion, she had thought about Hui Yao's situation. At that time, Hui Yao's top Creation Master resources were far superior. There was still a certain gap between them and the Freedom Federation. Now, Radiance had 1 Class 6 Creation Master and 2 Class 5 Creation Masters. Behind the scenes, there was still Lin Yuan. It meant that Radiance would have at least one more Class 6 Creation Master and a Class 5 Creation Master. The Moon Empress had never believed that Lin Yuan could concoct pure spirit qi. Everything depended on the standard of a Creation Master. After all, given Lin Yuan's strength, it was impossible for him to find the path to become a Class 5 Creation Master. A Creation Master's strength was closely related to a Spirit Qi professional's strength. However, as long as Lin Yuan could concoct such pure Spirit Qi, he would be able to use it. Lin Yuan could be considered a Class 6 Creation Master. Compared to extracting the power of eternity from the eternal heart image, mixing pure spiritual qi was undoubtedly more important. The Moon Empress specially inquired about it and found out that it had the momentum to become one of the top 3 factions of the Radiance sect. The Coiling Dragon Valley that filled the void of trade in the Whale Ocean. The Coiling Dragon Valley had obtained plenty of law crystals from Lin Yuan. Even Coiling Dragon Valley's old patriarch could become an undying. It was also related to the world crystals that Lin Yuan had provided. At that time, Lin Yuan had indeed controlled Diwanmi. However, Lin Yuan had already traded law crystals with the Coiling Dragon Valley. Moreover, the Miao family's beast creation garden had been destroyed by Sky City. He had also traded law crystals with Lin Yuan. The Moon Empress clearly remembered that she had not given him the law crystal. After all, the Moon Empress had never thought that Lin Yuan would grow so quickly. He did not expect Lin Yuan to use something like a law crystal. After discovering Lin Yuan's extraordinariness, he blinked his eyes. Lin Yuan had already grown to the point where he could help her. Not long ago, he even brought him to the swamp world. It absorbed the moon in the swamp world. The Moon Empress felt that Lin Yuan's growth was very important. As the master, it was very difficult for him to be of any more help. However, the Moon Empress could do her best. Go and guard Lin Yuan and protect him. At that moment, the other High Holiness didn't know what the Moon Empress was thinking. Sincere and joyful smiles appeared on the faces of the 12 kings. The old man sitting on the golden pillar in the middle heaved a sigh of relief. He raised his hand to the sunlight and looked at his wrinkled and old palms. The old man felt that he could finally relax at this moment. The old man believed that as long as his body was strong enough, he could hold on for another 5 years. Give the Moon Empress another 5 years to accumulate. Even if he really was on a journey to the west, the Moon Empress could also take over his position and protect Hui Yao. At that moment, the mountain river set bells, one of the 4 important artifacts of the Radiance Stabilization Nation, appeared. The sound suddenly became faster. Ripples splashed above the barrier erected by the set of mountains and rivers. Through the barrier, one could faintly see a figure standing in the air above the barrier. In an instant, the dozens of bells on the Shanha state bells. It glowed with a magnificent bronze light. The figure of a man covered in mountain patterns and the figure of a woman covered in river patterns. One on the left and one on the right, they appeared beside the chimes. Each of them held a wooden mallet in their hands. Both men and women wore musician hats on their head. They were like 2 court musicians. Immediately after, the wooden mallets in their hands were wrapped in a huge force and knocked on the set of mountains and rivers. A song that was filled with murderous intent suddenly rang out. The sound of the bell was magnificent. With every chime, a fairy holding an orchid appeared out of thin air in the sky. The fairy flew into the sky with a gentle and beautiful posture. The body of each fairy was formed by water patterns. The silk on their bodies was covered with mountain patterns. The orchid in their hands continued to grow as the fairy flew in the sky. Finally, the orchid pole became a sword. The orchid leaves were like streamers. The 36 fairies seemed to be waiting for something. At that moment, in the middle of the 36 flying fairies, a dancer who looked like a sacrificial priest appeared. In the hands of the dancer, a handful of silk threads condensed from mountain patterns and river patterns appeared. These silk threads were tied to the bodies of the 36 flying fairies. In an instant, the killing intent of these flying maidservants merged together. It was as if these 36 fairies could form a sword formation with the orchid sword in their hands at any time. They attacked the figure standing in the air at the top of the protective shield of the set of mountains and rivers. This was the killing formation formed by the set of mountains and rivers. It was the song of the set of mountains and rivers. Feeling this killing intent, he had already logged out of the star web. Li Su, who was waiting for the god of pity to descend, narrowed his eyes. It was undeniable that Hui Yao's national stabilizing treasure was indeed powerful. Thinking of this, Li Su looked fearfully at the old man sitting in the middle of the golden stone pillar. Back then, this old man had risked his legs to no longer be able to walk and lost a lot of his life force. He also had to refine the 7 national stabilizing treasures. They could indeed protect Hui Yao's country. Although the set of mountains and rivers attacked spontaneously, it was far from as sharp as the attack of a celestial phenomenon. But it was not much different from a casual attack of a celestial phenomenon. It would take some effort for him to receive this attack. During this process, if someone with the same strength as him suddenly made a move, he would not be able to escape. He would definitely be at a disadvantage. To a certain extent, the 7 national stabilizing treasures of Hui Yao with different functions, together with Hui Yao's majesty. It could guarantee that Hui Yao's majesty would have the upper hand in a battle with someone of the same strength. Even if the Radiance Federation's national stabilizing treasures were not defined as tools to assist Hui Yao's majesty. Now, the set of mountains and rivers was a spontaneous attack. Presumably, it should be able to easily kill a peak creation stage spirit creature. It could even seriously injure a fae that had an immortal body and activated an immortal body. However, this level of attack was far from enough for the god of pity. Even if this attack hit the god of pity, she only relied on the power of her life providence and did not activate her spirit chi to protect herself. She could still block it unscathed. At that moment, among the 13 majesties, the bamboo monarch, who had not spoken much, suddenly appeared. A purplish-gold bamboo pattern suddenly lit up on his forehead. His eyes also turned purplish-gold at that moment. A purplish-gold bamboo shadow connected heaven and earth like a pillar supporting the sky. Together with the soaring fairies, it attacked the figure above the shield. Right at this moment, a voice that seemed to pity all living beings resounded. I didn't come to the Radiance Federation to provoke conflict. I came here to bring everyone back after the end of the Independent 100 sequence. While speaking, a golden-red slender fishtail suddenly stretched down from above the shield. This fishtail was only the size of a normal human's legs. Its tail fin was full of cinnabar spots. These cinnabar spots emitted a captivating red divine brilliance. This seemingly soft fishtail collided with the purplish-gold bamboo shadow. Chapter 1677. The fishtail emitted a golden-red radiance that immediately covered the purple light of the bamboo shadow. The fishtail and the bamboo shadow collided, but it was not as expected. There was a fierce battle. The fish's tail calmly blocked the purple-gold bamboo shadow. It was like a pair of hands blocking a pair of chopsticks. It made the chopsticks unable to move forward. The orchid swords held by the 30 fairies holding the orchid sword. At this moment, the fishtail heavily chopped at the fishtail. The fishtail shook slightly, and the golden-red light shadow was like waves. It swung toward the 30 fairies holding the orchid swords. In an instant, these fairies holding the orchid swords collapsed into mountain patterns and river patterns. It could be said that the fishtail swung down and blocked the bamboo monarch's attack. It also easily dissolved the attack from the mountain river set bells that could kill a creation breed fae. At this moment, the pitying voice of the woman sounded again. Bamboo monarch, your attack just now was still at the level of 10 years ago. In these 10 years, it is impossible that you did not improve at all. It seems that the Radiant sect is still the same. You like to hide all your abilities. I blocked your attack, and I didn't even retaliate. This is my sincerity. While speaking, the fishtail swung. The golden red light shadow was like a wave, rushing toward the purple-gold bamboo shadow. The surging waves instantly crushed the purple-gold bamboo shadow into pieces. At this moment, the figure with the golden-red fishtail stood up completely. She was wearing a golden-red long gauze. On the long gauze there were huge pearls hanging one after another. The gauze could not hide the woman's exquisite body. Her face was exquisite, and her skin was snow-white. Her long golden-red hair hung below the fishtail. There were 2 red moles at the corners of her eyes like cinnabar spots on the tail. It could be said that other than her skin, the woman's entire body was golden-red. However, there was a trace of blue in her golden-red eyes. Although this blue was weak, it easily covered the golden-red color. It was as if this blue was the most agile part of the woman's body. Looking at the woman who appeared in the shield, the 13 majesties on the golden stone pillars all had serious expressions. However, compared to the 13 majesties of the Radiance sect, there was an even bigger reaction. He was one of the Freedom Federation's ambassadors, standing at the very back of the group. The examinee's originally expressionless face suddenly revealed an expression of disgust. At the same time, there was a deep fear. This figure looked at Li Su, who was at the forefront of the Freedom Federation's diplomatic mission. Li Su noticed the gaze of this figure. Seeing the surging gray in the figure's eyes, Li Su communicated directly with this figure through his soul power. Second page of revival. The arrival of the pitiful goddess will not affect our plan. Don't worry too much. The expression on the figure's face did not change. But after hearing Li Su's words, the surging gray in his eyes became even more intense. Li Su, the person the pity goddess hates the most is me, followed by the Moon Empress. If the compassionate goddess knows of my existence, can you guarantee that she won't attack me or affect my movements? Li Su glanced at Qianyu. Back in the Sacred Hall of Liberty, it was decided through a meeting. Li Su was the only leader of this diplomatic mission. Every majesty of the Freedom Federation operates their own forces, controlling the interests of one side. The cooperation with Second Page of Revival was privately contacted by Li Su himself. The other majesties of the Freedom Federation did not know. However, Qian Yu was the pity goddess's caretaker. He contacted the pity goddess in private and invited her to come personally. Although Li Su got the news from Qian Yu in advance, he was rather unhappy. However, in the Freedom Federation, everything was based on strength. Although they were all majesties, the right to speak was very different. In front of the pity goddess, Li Su could not change her decision. In the face of Second Page of Revival's doubts, Li Su could not give an accurate answer. Li Su had just arrived in the Radiance Federation and came into contact with Second Page of Revival. He was dissatisfied with Second Page of Revival. This was because the Radiance 100 sequence exam had officially begun. Li Su had not seen the existence of Sixth Page of Flogging. More than once, Li Su had asked Second Page of Revival about the Black Mass Cup. Second Page of Revival did not give an affirmative answer at first. However, when he asked for the second time, Second Page of Revival said very firmly. This made Li Su feel that Second Page of Revival was not reliable. Therefore, facing Second Page of Revival's doubts, Li Su said directly, "The pity goddess's arrival will not affect our cooperation. According to the content of our cooperation, you do not have to reveal your identity in front of the pity goddess. Even if the pity goddess really finds you, I will share some benefits with her. Before our cooperation ends, I guarantee that the pity goddess will not make a move on you." If the entire Radiance Sacred Hall had not been enveloped by the stately bells, it would take a certain amount of time to break through the stately bells, and Second Page of Revival would definitely leave this place immediately. This was because too many situations had exceeded Second Page of Revival's expectations. Moreover, until now, the pity goddess had not found Second Page of Revival. In order to take that step, the pity goddess had used the blood of the deep-sea merfolk to wash her body. She had forcibly allowed her body to obtain the merfolk bloodline. Because of this, the deep-sea merfolk were almost extinct. Among the Ocean Empire's 8 clans, the Emperor Whale clan, which was originally a vassal of the deep-sea merfolk, had lost their support. Even so, the Emperor Whale clan was still ahead of the Emperor Ray and Emperor Mermaid clans. However, because of this method, she had forcibly obtained the merfolk bloodline. The Pity Goddess had been cursed by the deep-sea merfolk. To break the curse, the Pity Goddess needed to purify the merfolk bloodline in her body. To let the merfolk bloodline in her body reach a certain level, there were 2 ways to improve the merfolk bloodline. One was to continue to use the blood of ordinary merfolk to wash herself. The other way was to gain the love of the mermaid royal family. Only by being marked by the mermaid royal family with a reverse scale could the bloodline be improved again. After learning about this, the Pity Goddess had mobilized the power of the entire Freedom Federation. She had searched all over the world. In the end, her efforts had paid off. The Pity Goddess had finally found a group of deep-sea merfolk in the sea near the Forbidden Land. The bloodline of these merfolk was very thin. The Pity Goddess had wanted to catch this group of deep-sea merfolk and raise them to achieve sustainable development. However, the original plan of the Tower Cannon also required the merfolk bloodline. It was Second Page of Revival who had personally killed this group of deep-sea merfolk that the Pity Goddess had treated as a treasure. They had extracted the merfolk bloodline and brought it back to the Tower Cannon. Because of this reason, there had been a rift between the Tower Cannon and the Freedom Federation, which had been relatively close. Later, the Tower Cannon told the Pity Goddess a piece of news. It was that the deep-sea merfolk were probably the descendants of a high-level dimensional creature in the water world. Chapter 1678. Back then, these high-level dimensional lifeforms might have come to the origin world through a pinnacle-class 5-dimensional rift. They reproduced in the deep sea and left behind descendants with relatively thin bloodlines. At first, the Pity God did not accept this explanation. However, one of the Freedom Federation's experts had contracted the origin water, a sacred source lifeform, which was the origin water. It made the Pity God feel close to the bloodline source. Thus, the Pity God believed the Pagoda Cannon. The Pity God used her resources to nurture this expert. Along the way, she even nurtured this expert into the Freedom Federation's majesty. In the end, this expert died at the hands of the Moon Empress. This allowed the Moon Empress to take her place and become the person that the Pity God hated the most. However, the Pity God did not even have the slightest bit of hope. Apart from hating the Moon Empress, she would still hate herself. Second Page Revival made up his mind. In a while, when the competition started, he only wanted to protect himself. Even if the younger generation of the Freedom Federation envoys were all dead, he would not make a move. After calculating the time, he remembered that Lord Scarlet Page's 4 riders were about to arrive. Second Page Revival's heart calmed down. When the Bamboo Monarch heard the Pity God's words, he said coldly, "It's not a good habit to come uninvited. As for how capable we are, you don't have to worry about it." The Pity God did not care about the Bamboo Monarch's words. However, when she looked at the Moon Empress, her entire body suddenly turned cold. Her eyes were filled with killing intent. "Moon Empress, long time no see." The Moon Empress looked up at the Pity God and said, 10 years is indeed a long time. Even if we don't do anything right now, our strength will still improve. But you have been standing still. You must not be having a good time, right?" When she heard the Moon Empress words, the Pity God was so angry that she laughed. The mermaid bloodline could not be improved, and the Pity God's strength was completely stuck. Therefore, even if the Pity God had suffered a lot in the past 10 years, in terms of strength, she still did not make any progress. The Moon Empress words were the same as touching a sore spot. The Pity God had only come to the Radiance Federation to bring Qian Yu back safely. Because of Qian Yu's sacred source lifeform, the Pity God saw new hope. Otherwise, the Pity God would not be in the mood to choose a favored person and train him. However, after hearing the Moon Empress' words, right now, Lien Shen really couldn't take this lying down. Moon Empress, I haven't made any progress for the past 10 years. But so what if my strength hasn't improved in 10 years? You, on the other hand, don't have much lifespan left. If you can't fight against the heavens, you'll only be struggling at death's door. If your strength hadn't improved by leaps and bounds 10 years ago, in another 3 to 4 years, I think there will be one less Lord of Radiance. The number of Class 5 Creation Masters in Radiance will also decrease by 1. By then, the Radiance sect will have 2 Class 5 Creation Masters again. It's the same as a few decades ago, one less than the Azure Federation. When the time comes, the 3 great federations should be properly ranked. I heard that the Sand State Federation has a second Class 5 Creation Master. I wonder if the Republic of Radiance will be able to maintain the glory of being in 3rd place when compared to the Sand Continent Federation? At this moment, regarding this sudden turn of events, on the 100 silver stone pillars were the Radiance 100 sequence members and the eliminated candidate. They were all watching it happen. The Moon Empress knew that the Goddess of Compassion wanted to make an issue out of her, to belittle the Republic of Radiance, to attack the Republic of Radiance's morale. Therefore, the Moon Empress didn't say anything. She pointed her finger at the Goddess of Compassion. A chain of moonlight shot toward the Goddess of Mercy. The Goddess of Compassion didn't care much, but when she saw the layer of clear brilliance that appeared on the moonlight chain, the Goddess of Compassion's expression immediately turned serious. The dark red cinnabar spot on her fishtail rapidly grew bigger. It turned the originally golden red fishtail into a captivating red. The Goddess of Compassion did a flip in the air, and her golden red fishtail fiercely whipped the moonlight chain. At this moment, the Goddess of Compassion's fishtail was also stained with a layer of clear brilliance. After the two collided, the Goddess of Compassion looked at the Moon Empress in surprise. Interesting. You've actually resolved the lifespan crisis. Heaven and Earth treasures don't have the ability to greatly increase lifespan. I think your strength has broken through. However, awakening the birth providence is just the beginning of reaching that realm. As she spoke, the expression on the Goddess of Compassion's face was no longer as arrogant as before. Except for that old man, who was a true pinnacle expert at that time. Radiance had produced another pinnacle expert at that time. If it was just the old man, the Goddess of Compassion was confident that she could escape unscathed. But now there was another Moon Empress. Even if the Goddess of Compassion could leave, she would never be able to take Qian Yu away. It was not an exaggeration to say that Qian Yu was the Goddess of Compassion's life. If Qian Yu died, the Goddess of Compassion would completely lose hope. Therefore, the Goddess of Compassion said no more. Her figure flashed in the air and appeared again. She was already beside Li Su. The Moon Empress and Night Leaning Moon looked at each other. Their original plan was to keep the people of the Pagoda Canon in radiance as much as possible. Back then, the Moon Empress had made such a decision because her strength had increased. But now that the Goddess of Compassion had arrived, the Moon Empress had to re-examine her plan. The Moon Empress was not afraid of the Goddess of Compassion. With Lin Yuan's help, the Moon Empress had taken another step forward after awakening her birth providence. Even if she fought with an eternal expert on the land of Radiance, the Moon Empress could also guarantee that it would not affect Radiance in the slightest. But now, once she fought with the Goddess of Compassion, the Goddess of Compassion would use her full strength. It would immediately cause a disaster in Radiance. It was unknown how many ordinary people would be affected. Her Majesty's duty was to protect the stability of Radiance. In fact, in the Origin world, the various federations could maintain relative peace. This was because these federations all had top experts. These top experts were the Federation's strongest deterrent. They were also the foundation of the Federation's self-protection. For example, there were no such top experts in the Agon continent's 3 major federations. There were no Class 5 creation masters. Therefore, even if there were abundant resources, there had never been a moment of true peace. The Radiance Federation and the Freedom Federation had always been arm wrestling. But neither side had chosen to make the first move. It was precisely because of this reason. Because no matter which side made a move, if they did not have the confidence to kill the other side immediately, they would immediately suffer from the other side's counterattack. The goddess of compassion's arrival made the Moon Empress need to adjust her original plan. It was just that she did not know which 2 pages of the Pagoda Canon had come this time. The relationship between the Freedom Federation and the Pagoda Canon had never been able to become truly close. It could be said that 80% of it was because of the goddess of compassion. At least 4 of the 8 pages of the Pagoda Canon had become enemies with the goddess of compassion. They had fought with each other before. The Moon Empress had never planned to do anything to the Freedom Federation's envoy. Therefore, the goddess of compassion's arrival was not considered a bad thing. Chapter 1679. The relationship between the Freedom Federation and the Tower Canon had always been rather ambiguous. In other words, the Freedom Federation and most of the factions in the main world were rather ambiguous. However, they hated each other. This abnormal contradictory situation was mainly due to the relationship between the Freedom Federation and the other federations. It was all up to the overlords themselves. Every majesty, for their own benefit, would go and befriend a faction. However, this kind of friendship usually only represented the overlord themselves. It could not represent the entire Freedom Federation, just like the Pity Goddess and the Tower Canon. However, the other 2 overlords of the Freedom Federation who were qualified to be called gods and Li Su were close to the Tower Canon. The Tower Canon would send 2 8-page members to the Radiance Federation, which was the news given by the Heaven-Blessed Mansion. The Heaven-Blessed Mansion had received such a great favor from the Moon Goddess and Lin Yuan. The words that came out of his mouth could not be false. Any expert who could call himself a god had already reached that level. An expert of this level, especially in the Freedom Federation, was extremely powerful. It was impossible for them to wrong themselves and fulfill the interests of others. Therefore, the Pity Goddess most likely did not know that the Tower Canon had 2 pages. If the Tower Canon's 2 8-page members wanted to find a suitable ally in the Radiance Federation, then the best choice of ally would be Li Su. The Moon Empress planned to keep an eye on Li Su and be on guard. In addition, she could not relax on the Pity Goddess side. Who knew if the Pity Goddess had other plans when she came? By now, 3 days had passed. The Radiance 100 sequence test was about to come to an end. The area of the test space was rapidly shrinking from the periphery to the inside. The battles on the last day made all the Star Web viewers feel shocked from the bottom of their hearts. This duel had shown all the people in the Radiance Federation who were watching the 100 sequence. It showed the battle between the human spirit chi professionals and dimensional lifeforms. It let people know that peace and stability were forged with flesh and blood. At this moment, there were only 1,700 spirit chi professionals left in the central area. At this time, there were still so many people left. It was mainly due to Gao Feng's efforts. Gao Feng's 2 spirit spring lilies automatically gathered spirit chi. In the air, they formed 2 translucent spirit chi vortexes. These spirit spring lilies transferred all the spirit chi to Gao Feng. They helped Gao Feng recover the spirit chi in his body. The petals of the breeze hibiscus landed on every spirit chi professional and formed a hibiscus mark. It would continuously replenish the spiritual energy of these candidates. In the beginning, Gao Feng's spiritual power was exhausted. It was a harsh burden to nourish over 8,000 spirit chi professionals at once. Under this kind of burden, Gao Feng quickly exhausted himself. If the strength of the 2 spirit spring lilies hadn't reached Diamond X/Fantasy V, the skill also had the ability to speed up the recovery of spiritual energy. Gao Feng might even pass out from overexertion. However, even if Gao Feng persevered, The hibiscus imprint's effect on over 8,000 spirit chi professionals was also greatly reduced, like when Gao Feng used it normally. However, it was precisely this trace after trace of spiritual power that was being restored. It allowed these examinees to have hope and rely on him. Even though he was heavily injured and had to be treated again and again, he still persisted. With the continuous loss of members, Gao Feng's pressure became lighter and lighter. When the number of people was reduced to 2,000, Gao Feng's situation of not being able to make ends meet had turned for the better. Gradually, the two spirit spring lilies filled Gao Feng's body with spirit energy. Gao Feng used all his strength to activate the hibiscus imprint. At the same time, he let the spirit spring lilies use the lily dragon spirit. The giant dragon image with the lily flower wrapped around it controlled the clouds and rain. It replenished the spiritual power of every surviving examinee and their phase. If Lin Yuan was the savior of the entire 100-sequence exam, he used methods that ordinary examinees couldn't understand to control the exam's difficulty. No matter how Lin Yuan looked at it, he was like an invigilator. Gao Feng's behavior was like the examinee's savior. He was clearly a soft support and didn't attack throughout the entire process. However, he became the examinee's strongest support at this moment. At this moment, the major live streaming rooms were no longer one-sided praises and Li Nao's bootlicking. Gao Feng's performance had completely suppressed Li Nao. Lu Shuang said with certainty, "The three phase that Gao Feng summoned must be 3 Diamond X/Fantasy V existences. Otherwise, it is impossible to support the current situation. Moreover, the abilities of these 3 phase must be extremely powerful. Among all the supports that I have seen, Gao Feng might be a soft support, but in a team battle, Gao Feng is definitely the strongest support." While speaking, Lu Shuang pondered. At this moment, Lu Shuang seemed to understand why the Radiance 100-sequence exam started. Black formed black wings on its back, and went to look for Gao Feng. Originally, Lu Shuang couldn't understand. But now, Lu Shuang seemed to have thought it through. To put it bluntly, Black and Gao Feng came to this exam to gain experience. Gao Feng and Black both had Diamond X/Fantasy V phase. Such strength had exceeded the scope of the exam. The two of them were originally prepared to watch from the sidelines in the Yellow Sand Castle. They only made a move when they saw that the other examinees couldn't hold on anymore. It was rumored that His Holiness Cicada Cry had accepted a disciple. This disciple was a support-type spirit chi professional from a top faction. It seemed like he was a pure support. Thinking about it, this person should be Gao Feng. This was something that Lu Shuang had analyzed from her own level. He definitely wouldn't say it in the live streaming room. If Gao Feng was really His Holiness Cicada Cry's disciple, only Gao Feng himself could reveal it. If she revealed it herself, it would be overstepping her authority. But if she analyzed wrongly and Gao Feng wasn't His Holiness Cicada Cry's disciple, if she said it out loud, wouldn't it be the same as spreading rumors? She didn't have the ability to arrange a disciple for His Holiness Cicada Cry for no reason. Lu Shuang didn't say anything. The viewers in the live streaming room started to discuss without any scruples. Snowflakes on the cloud. Did you guys see the post on Starweb? Gao Feng is the young family head of the Gao family, a top faction. No wonder he is so strong. I announce that from now on, Gao Feng is the same as Black. They are both my husbands. Euro Sakura, sister, tighten your legs a little. First Black is mine, second Gao Feng is also mine. Boots, blooming for your life. I will put a chicken coop here today. Let's see who will crawl into it. Shadow, 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 shadow. Gao Feng is definitely the strongest support I have ever seen. I was wrong. I shouldn't have had any prejudice against support-type spirit chi professionals. When I form a team in the Guild Alliance in the future, I must choose a support-type spirit chi professional. Regretful World Walk. I suggest that you guys consider forming a team with support-type spirit chi professionals in the future. After all, not every support-type spirit chi professional is Gao Feng. Chapter 1680. Agate Tangerine. Indeed, after forming a team, the output, defense, and healing are not enough. Just don't blame the support in the team. The comments in the live streaming room were so fast that Lu Shuang couldn't keep up. It could be said that this duel, which lasted for 3 days, was getting more and more boring. Because of Black, Gao Feng, Li Nao, and a series of heroes fighting in every corner. And it became exciting. A person's quality, ability to resist pressure, communication ability, strength, and other factors. They were all at a glance during the 3 days of the test. In the entire test, as long as they had the ability, they had obtained enough attention and fans. At that moment, a childish post instantly became popular in the forum. The general content of the post was, "I am fortunate to have the talent of a combat class spirit chi professional. I must work hard to become stronger. My hometown is in a remote county in Cloud Pool City. There are several swamp dimensional rifts that have opened here, and huge crocodiles and flying insects that are bigger than heads have come out. Giant lizards that can flatten a house with a tail. People who live in our world are used to it. That was because every time a dimensional rift opened up, it would be destroyed. There will always be uncles in black clothes and city guards in green clothes on the scene to solve it. Now, I want to say to those uncles in black clothes and city guards that have worked hard, I must become an uncle in black clothes and a city guard in the future." Through the post on StarWeb, one could see the poster. From the poster's profile picture, one could see the poster's personal space. The person who discovered the post was an 8-year-old girl. A primary school student who had just started a spirit chi professional elementary school. In fact, before this post was posted, many people were already thinking the same thing. The hot-bloodedness in his bones was resonating with an invisible light. There were many spirit chi professionals who didn't intend to go to the abyss world to develop. They packed their bags. Everyone who had the talent to become a combat class spirit chi professional felt that they were lucky. No matter how difficult it was to upgrade phase or how dangerous the battle was, at least when facing danger, they had the ability to protect themselves. More and more such posts appeared. Radiance was dazzling in the StarWeb forum. Everything that happened in the StarWeb live streaming room and forum had nothing to do with the candidates who were fighting the insect tide. The StarWeb blocked the outside world from probing the inside. But in the test space, if someone possessed the talent of a creation master, it could detect teammates, opponents, phase abilities, and exclusive skills. The benefits of becoming a creation weren't just about enhancing phase. At the same time, it would be of great help in battle. Fighting against a spirit chi professional that was stronger than him? This benefit was negligible. He could fight against a spirit chi professional who was almost as strong as him. After the creation master understood the other party's strength and exclusive skill, the creation master didn't hesitate. Everything could be prepared in advance and respond effectively. Even if he knew he couldn't win, he could still find an opportunity to escape. He wouldn't have to fight until the very end to realize that he wasn't a match for his opponent from the very beginning. Lin Yuan had checked many people's phase in the Yellow Sand Castle. Li Nao's dead folded-winged purple Spiathos and the heavily injured rotten spotted Tengu that was still fighting the Horned Demon. They were all power offense-type canine phase. Canine phase were a major species. There were countless outstanding phase. Li Nao's talent gave him the qualifications to become a pinnacle spirit chi professional. Li Nao had only summoned 2 phase, be it the folded-winged purple Spiathos or the rotten spotted Tengu. They were extremely outstanding among the canine phase. In Lin Yuan's opinion, Li Nao had a lot of potential to be nurtured. When Lin Yuan saw Gao Feng's Spirit Spring Lily, their abilities were only on the platinum level. At that time, the Spirit Spring Lily didn't have the ability to control the Dragon Spirit and summon rain. Lin Yuan used Morbius True Data to check on the Spirit Spring Lily. After checking, Lin Yuan discovered something. These two Spirit Spring Lily's diamond abilities were surprisingly the same. They were all Lily Spirit nurturing. For a Fae, the probability of having the same normal ability was very high. In order to make the normal ability the same as the elite ability, one had to choose from hundreds of them. If they had the same silver ability, one would only be able to choose one pair from tens of thousands of them. Back then, Lu Pinru wanted to choose normal, elite, and silver abilities. She had spent a lot of effort to obtain the same exclusive skill as the Bronze Luster Branch Mulberry Silkworm. Even if she had found the Radiance 100 sequence number 18, White Devil, for help, she had spent a lot of effort to find one. Afterward, Lu Pinru joined the Dome Guild Club. She became a member of the Dome Guild Club's reserve team. Lin Yuan helped Lu Pinru search for luster weaver silkworms that met her requirements in the Brahma insect cage. He found 13 at once. The main reason was that the Brahma insect cage was a top faction that monopolized the market and had more than 70% of insect species phase. It had tens of millions of luster weaver silkworms. However, the stronger the Fae, the greater the change in the abilities. After the Creation Master's research, he found out the abilities obtained when the Fae evolved and the Fae's survival conditions. It had a lot to do with the Fae's own thoughts. When a Fae grew to platinum, its bloodline would more or less have some changes. Therefore, for two platinum Faes to have the same abilities, this was already a very difficult thing to do. After Lu Pinru enhanced the dozens of luster weaver silkworms, it was impossible to maintain the same abilities. However, this would not affect Lu Pinru. The first three abilities were the same, allowing Lu Pinru to quickly assist the team. The luster weaver silkworm's high-grade abilities consumed more spiritual power. It could not be used casually like low-grade abilities. These different high-grade abilities made Lu Pinru's support ability more comprehensive. It increased Lu Pinru's value in the team. Lin Yuan felt that if His Holiness Cicada Cry had not encountered Gao Feng, even if it had encountered Lu Pinru, His Holiness Cicada Cry might have considered taking Lu Pinru as a disciple. For two platinum Faes to have the same abilities, the probability was 1 in 10,000. However, Gao Feng was actually lucky that the two Spirit Spring Lily's diamond abilities were exactly the same. Lily Spirit Containment. Absorb the soul of an animal Fae through the root. Depending on the absorbed animal soul, obtain the ability from the Fae's bloodline and use this ability to spread spiritual power. In Lin Yuan's opinion, the Spirit Spring Lily's diamond ability, Lily Spirit Containment, was rather special. Dragon Spirit was just a form of expression of the Spirit Spring Lily's diamond ability. It was the Spirit Spring Lily's diamond ability, Lily Spirit Containment. If Gao Feng wanted to, he could play more tricks. Chapter 1681. It was the Spirit Spring Lily's diamond rank skill, Lily Spirit Accumulation. It was very similar to Lin Yuan's contracted Golden Wings exclusive skill, Unstable Temperament. During the process of coming into contact with Faes, one's temperament was unstable. It could store the Fae's exclusive skills and passive abilities. At that time, the exclusive skill Unpredictable Temperament would become an exclusive skill and passive skill that could be replaced. The time limit for each replacement was 1 cycle of the sun and moon. Lin Yuan had yet to nurture the Golden Wing. However, after Chu Xi returned, Lin Yuan had let the Golden Wing use its exclusive skill, Unstable Temperament. He stored the Silver Mirror Radiant Sun Bull's elite skill, Sacrifice. Back then, Lin Yuan had chosen the Dying Sharp Iron Horn Bull. He had taken a fancy to the Sharp Iron Horn Bull's elite ability, Sacrifice. It could be said that Lin Yuan had always coveted Sacrifice. The elite grade ability, Sacrifice, had only been found on cow species Faes. However, the chances of this happening were simply too low. When the golden-winged bird became stronger and Lin Yuan's main body was injured, he could share the damage with the Golden Wing. This was a life-saving skill at a critical moment. In addition, it was very easy for the Golden Wing to change its stored passive skills and exclusive skills after using the unpredictable temperament skill. One day later, they could make the changes. As for the Spirit Spring Lily's diamond rank skill, Lily Spirit Accumulation. Compared to Golden Wing's exclusive skill, Unpredictable Temperament, the time limit was shorter. However, a large amount of resources had to be invested in the replacement process. After all, it wasn't that easy to refine a Fae's soul. In order to refine a Fae's soul, the Fae had to be strong enough. Only then would it be possible for the soul to take form in the process of death. Secondly, he needed the help of a soul-type Fae. Furthermore, this soul-type Fae's strength was not inferior to a myth breed. A soul-type Fae with strength below myth breed. Unless one was extremely talented, they would not have the ability to extract the target's soul. Of course, this situation did not apply to the legendary soul-thought whale. Gao Feng used the Lily Dragon Spirit to summon rain and restore the target's spiritual power through raindrop. It was obvious that Gao Feng had let the Spirit Spring Lily absorb plenty of Flood Dragon species Fae's souls. On this basis, Gao Feng had many other choices. After all, every Fae had a different innate ability. In the current situation, if Gao Feng allowed the Jasmine Lily to absorb the soul of the Drought Sandworm, it would not be able to survive. In that case, any Spirit Chi professionals or Faes that had their feet on the ground would die. They could recover their spiritual energy through contact with the ground. However, contracting the Drought Sandworm also had its drawback. During the battle, flying-type Faes would not be able to replenish their Spirit Chi. However, absorbing the Flood Dragon Fae's soul and condensing the Lily Dragon Spirit was not foolproof. If Lin Yuan and Gao Feng were enemies, he only needed to summon Chimey and let it cast clear skies. The dark clouds formed by the Lily Dragon spirits dispersed. Therefore, if it was really a battle in the wild, Gao Feng should prepare more spirit item souls. Then use it at your discretion. This allowed his Lily Spirit Accumulation to not be countered by the enemy. Lin Yuan was more aware of the difficulty of the test than the other candidates. The test space covered 100,000 kilometers. The speed at which the test space was shrinking was about 10,000 kilometers every half an hour. In other words, 5 hours later, the test space would disappear completely. While the trial space was shrinking, the dimensional rift would not disappear. Instead, they would converge at the center. As the space shrank, it was the same as increasing the cohesion of the exotic beast tide. The decisive factor for the candidates to persist until now was Lin Yuan. If not, they would have taken the initiative to extend their sand palms from the yellow sand and attack the Class 3 and Class 4 alien insects and demons. They would drag the Class 3 and Class 4 alien insects and demons into the yellow sand. Red Thorn would constantly consume the Eye of Relinquish to maintain and expand the Sea of Flowers. Even if there were 10 more Gao Fengs, the core region would have long been wiped out. A support was just a support, especially a soft support. When the teammates were strong enough, the soft support would be able to reflect its ability. However, when the team was not strong enough, no matter how strong the soft support was, it would not be able to turn the situation around. Lin Yuan quietly looked at the core region and the 1,000 candidate. At that moment, the oath that everyone Anli now had made was already invalid. It was obvious that someone was playing tricks on them. Such a situation immediately caused an intense discussion on the Star Web. Everyone had different thoughts in their hearts. Therefore, the Star Web netizens had different opinions. However, Lin Yuan felt that there was nothing wrong with the current competition. Right now, each of the 1,000 candidates had sacrificed too much for the team. Their bodies were always covered in new injuries and old injuries. In fact, some people's hands and feet were already missing. They were still holed up in the camp and commanding Faes to fight. This Radiance 100 sequence test was a competition after all. The first 3 days had already proven these people's character. 3 days later, the competition that had already been decided would naturally be carried out. At that moment, there were only 6 former Radiance 100 Sequence members left. It was enough to see how high the quality of the former 100 Sequence members was. Right now, the original cooperative relationship had become a competitive relationship. Everyone's reaction was also the focus of the High Lord's assessment. Emotions and rationality had always been 2 contradictory values. Even if the emotional people had thoughts, it would be difficult for them to make a move on their comrades who had fought for 3 days. The rational people knew that this was an assessment. When it was time to make a decision, they had to make a decision. On the golden stone pillar, Night Leaning Moon and Cicada Cry were both observing. The remaining 1,000 people could be said to be the true elites of the Radiance sex younger generation. The rational people were chosen by Night Leaning Moon. The spirit guards were in charge of taking in calamitous phase, destroying dimensional rifts, and dealing with emergencies. The spirit guards could be in danger at any time. Therefore, the spirit guards had to have a rational side. The spirit guards and the city guards pursued the duty of protection. The city guards paid particular attention to not abandoning or giving up because they were protecting the big city. In the big city, even if they were pushed back by a step, the people in the big city would be in danger. Therefore, the city guards never abandoned or gave up. They could only advance and not retreat. Emotional people were suitable to be cultivated as city guard. When the spirit guards were in danger, they could be completely wiped out at any time. There had to be rational people to make a decision. When it was time to give up, they had to give up. Sometimes, giving up oneself was also to be able to better protect. At present, the competing candidates in the core area had been divided by the 2 High Lords. They had already been divided by the 2 High Lords. In the next year, these candidates would continuously receive invitations from the true spirit guards and the major city guard. End of this chapter. Chapter 1682. Of course, these candidates could also refuse. However, the candidates who agreed to the invitation would receive a huge amount of resources from the Spirit Guards and the City Guard. Previously, the Indigo Azure Guard Captain, the Storm Guard Captain, and Lin Yuan had worked together. A large part of those high-quality bronze phase were used to nurture these newcomers. The Spirit Guards might be dangerous, but they would give great compensation to the families of each sacrifice. Back then, Lin Yuan's parents had only been 2 spirit guards with platinum phase. They were 2 very ordinary members of the spirit guards. In their early years, they had received a lot of resources and help from the spirit guard. After death, they had used their merits to exchange for a source-type item, as well as 100 radiance dollars. Back then, Lin Yuan and Chu Si had not been able to obtain these resources immediately. This was because Chu Si's parents had entrusted them to Auntie Zhang and Uncle Li. Auntie Zhang and Uncle Li had become Lin Yuan and Chu Si's guardians. In addition, their parents' decision was to wait for Lin Yuan and Chu Si to reach adulthood and have clear values before obtaining this money. When Auntie Zhang and Uncle Li had left the Xia region, they had informed the Spirit Guard. In the absence of Lin Yuan and Chu Si's guardians, Dong Hai had immediately set off. He had brought these resources to Lin Yuan. Moreover, these resources were not given in one go. After that, Lin Yuan would receive 100 radiance dollars as compensation every year. All in all, this was a huge expense. However, in recent years, the Spirit Guards had been constantly increasing this expense. The benefits were getting better and better. This year, they had introduced the service of providing free medical care for family members. If Chu Si and Lin Yuan were just ordinary people, they would have a yearly supply of 100 radiance dollars. They would be able to live an extremely wealthy life. After all, Lin Yuan had worked in the face store for a year. He could only save tens of thousands of Federation dollars. After calculating, it was just a few tenths of a radiance dollar. At present, the number of people in the core area had been sharply reduced to 500. Surprisingly, Gao Feng, who was in the center area, had not been targeted. Gao Feng looked at the examinees who had started to move and sighed. If not for the sake of preserving his strength, Gao Feng would have released his contracted bloodline of Desolation Fey. He should be able to easily hold on until the test space completely disappeared. However, his bloodline of Desolation Fey was different. He was about to face the powerful enemies of the Freedom Federation's envoys. Gao Feng had to hide. One of Li Nao's hands and half of his leg had already disappeared during the battle with the bug tide. At this moment, Li Nao was leaning on the dug position. The rotten-spotted heavenly dog was guarding Li Nao's side. Li Nao had been using his full strength when fighting against the insect swarm. Therefore, even with Gao Feng's help, there wasn't much spiritual energy left in the body of the spotted hound. At this time, Li Nao was at the edge. After the outermost power offense-type spirit chi professionals were devoured by the insect tide, Li Nao became the outermost member. Looking at the number of examinees, the number of examinees had already decreased to over 300. Li Nao felt that he couldn't hold on any longer. Li Nao sighed slightly. He had originally occupied the most advantageous position in the entire examination, but for the sake of the entire team, he gave up his advantage. The chance to return to the Radiance 100 sequence had slipped from his hands. If it was before the start of the assessment, Li Nao felt that it was impossible for him to do such a thing. But now, this test made Li Nao understand the weight of responsibility. He looked at the 4 horned demons, which had already exhausted their spirit chi and were lying on the ground by the spotted hound, crashing straight at him. Li Nao slowly closed his eyes. He didn't have the chance to enter the 100 sequence again in this assessment. However, he had done what he had to do. Even if he had regrets, he wouldn't feel guilty or blame himself when he thought about it many years later. At this moment, Li Nao suddenly felt his body go soft. The sharp horns of the 4 horned demons, which were supposed to be inserted into Li Nao's body, were inserted into a small piece of quicksand. Li Nao had already sunk into the quicksand. Li Nao, who had sunk into the quicksand, didn't feel suffocated. Because of the flowing sand, Li Nao's nose spontaneously left an air strike. The sand flow had power. When Li Nao breathed, he wouldn't inhale the sand into his nose. Li Nao instantly knew that this should be Black, who was in the yellow sand castle, protecting him. At this moment, Li Nao suddenly felt that the sand flow was constantly pushing him up. Li Nao felt as though he was being pushed up into the sky. All of a sudden, Li Nao felt his eyes lit up. He saw light. Li Nao opened his eyes and saw a young man with a silver mask standing in front of him. He was sitting on the ground in a sorry state. Due to the previous battle with the beast tide, his clothes were in a mess. Even a part of his body couldn't be covered anymore. This made Li Nao feel rather awkward. At the same time, Li Nao suddenly realized something. The mask on Black's face was completely different from the mask he remembered. The mask on Black's face was no longer the plain silver color on the star web. Instead, it had a few shallow lines. When he was in the 100 Seeds Tower, Li Nao had really seen this mask. At that time, Li Nao only thought that it was a low-quality imitation of Black's fan. But he didn't expect it to be Black himself. Li Nao was just about to thank him when he noticed the young man in black in front of him. He had already handed him a blue and white spirit chi clothing. However, one of Li Nao's hands and feet had already disappeared. It was already impossible for him to put on his clothes. Thinking of this, Li Nao, who had read many strange books, suddenly thought of the book about changing clothes in the secret room. Could it be that Black was going to help him change his clothes? It couldn't be. Lin Yuan didn't know what was going on in Li Nao's mind. Back in Millstone Town, Lin Yuan had helped Zhang Xiaobai regrow his severed arm. In addition, he had fought against Chern Hongfeng in the Star Web Tower climbing match. He had healed the big hole in his shoulder blade. Therefore, Lin Yuan's healing ability was no longer a secret. Just as Li Nao's imagination was running wild and his face was flushed, Li Nao saw Lin Yuan raise his hand, and a green beam of light landed on his body. Immediately after, Li Nao felt the pain in his body weakening. Immediately after, Li Nao felt the pain in his body weakening. The fine wounds on his body and the injuries to his internal organs were constantly being healed. Immediately after, the amputation of Li Nao's hands and feet swelled and itched. Li Nao looked down and realized that his hands and feet were slowly growing back. This made Li Nao's eyes widen. Previously, there were too many rumors about Black on the star web. Li Nao had paid attention to Black. However, he deeply doubted many of the rumors. At this moment, Li Nao realized. It seemed that the rumors on the star web were all true. Moreover, the rumors didn't seem to be comparable to reality. At this moment, Li Nao finally knew. Why did Black, who had outstanding combat ability, say that he was a healing-type spirit chi professional? End of this chapter. Chapter 1683. As a former 100 Sequence member, Li Nao didn't just have strength that far surpassed the other younger generation. He also had an extremely strong vision. Therefore, Li Nao could see how magical and powerful Black's healing ability was. Healing-type spirit chi professionals were already rare. Compared to combat-class spirit chi professionals, there were only a few hundred spirit chi professionals. Only then would there be one or two healing-type spirit chi professionals. In the early stages, healing-type spirit chi professionals didn't have much combat ability. After the spirit chi professionals reached C rank and the healing-type phase reached silver, the healing-type spirit chi professionals' role in the team would then be highlighted. Otherwise, they would just be at the bottom of the team. They needed protection but didn't have much healing ability. This was also why so many teams in the Guild Alliance needed healing-type spirit chi professionals. They knew that healing-type spirit chi professionals were rare. They would invite all the spirit chi professionals that met the team's requirements into the team like a boss. However, they weren't willing to lower their requirements. Currently, there were 3 healing-type spirit chi professionals in the 100 sequence. Apart from White Devil, who was still at sequence 18 in the 100 sequence. As for the other 2, one was ranked 76th and the other was ranked 81st. These 3 healing-type spirit chi professionals that could enter the 100 sequence had one thing in common. None of them were pure healers. White Devil's healing-type phase could all cause considerable damage to the target. In terms of healing ability, White Devil wasn't even as outstanding as the 2 healing-type spirit chi professionals ranked 76th and 81st. In Li Nao's opinion, White Devil was a power offense-type spirit chi professional wearing a healing-type spirit chi professional skin. Such a spirit chi professional would highlight their individual combat ability. However, their value in the team would be greatly reduced. Gao Feng had used his own strength to prove the value of pure support in the team. As for pure healers with similar strength to Gao Feng, their value in the team would only be higher than Gao Feng. Before this, Li Nao had never heard of any healing ability that could regenerate severed limbs. Even those king-class experts who had their limbs severed in battle. They could only find high-star spirit craftsmen to use jade-textured wood and metals to create some bionic limbs. Bionic limbs were too different from real limbs. In battle, intense activities would cause the bionic limbs to be damaged. Therefore, if a spirit chi professional was disabled, basically, it would be very difficult for him to join a team of similar strength. They could only team up with teams that were much weaker than them and hang out together. In the Radiance 100 sequence, there was once a 100 sequence member who had lost his right arm while participating in the training. Losing an arm was much better than losing a leg. But even so, in the battle, this member of the 100 sequence who had lost his right arm. From the original 58 it dropped all the way. 2 years later, he fell out of the 100 sequence. As for the technique that Black had just used, perfect, to regenerate the short limbs. Previously, Li Nao had heard rumors that Black had made Zhang Xiaobai's arm grow back in Millstone Town. Since there was no video recording at that time, it was all transmitted by mouth. Therefore, not many people believed this rumor. Until Black used his healing ability in the Star Web duel. Only then did many people realize how terrifying Black's healing ability was. He couldn't help but believe in Black. Back then, it was really possible for Zhang Xiaobai's severed limbs to regrow. It was just that no one had ever proven this point. Zhang Xiaobai seemed to be deliberately hiding something. He didn't accept any interviews. In Li Nao's opinion, no matter how strong Black's combat ability was, with just this technique alone, Black was qualified to call himself a healing-type spirit chi professional. He was different from combat-class spirit chi professionals like White Demon, who wore the skin of a healing-type spirit chi professional. Black was a healing-type spirit chi professional who wore the skin of a combat-class spirit chi professional. In a large-scale team battle, if Black was willing to heal the team, when the entire test reached the third day, there would be at least 10,000 people in the team. This was because phase and spirit chi professionals were attacked by the alien insects and demons. The strength of the alien insects and demons was there. The full-powered attack from the Class 4 alien insects and demons could only severely injure a Platinum Fae. However, it wouldn't let the Platinum Fae die. With the healing of a healing-type spirit chi professional, the serious injuries could slowly recover. However, if this attack shattered the bones that broke the limbs, during the healing process, there was no way to quickly recover the broken bones and limbs. As a result, as long as the alien insects and demons crippled the Fae, it was fine if it was a Fae that relied on elemental combat. It could continue to pour out elemental abilities. However, if it was a Fae that relied on its physical body to fight, these Faes would become the food in the alien beast tide, waiting to be divided by the alien insects and demons at any time. If Black's combat ability was said to be, it made Li Nao feel that Black was a genius that he couldn't compare with. After realizing Black's powerful healing ability and irreplaceable functionality, it made Li Nao realize Black's strategic significance. Black's strategic significance was, in a way, to the entire Federation. It was more important than Black's strength. For some reason, Li Nao felt that once Black became a 100 Sequence member, even if he couldn't become a Radiance Envoy, he would at least become a member of the Radiance Knights. Li Nao wasn't qualified to see the strength of Black's disciple. However, Li Nao felt that the three techniques that Black had displayed, no matter which technique it was, it should have reached the standard of Black's disciple. His limbs had completely recovered, and Li Nao quickly stood up. He thanked Black in a solemn manner. Then, he looked down at his spirit chi clothing that had basically become tattered cloth. Fortunately, he was wearing a waist armor made of metal spiritual materials. Otherwise, he would have really lost his composure. Li Nao thought that they were both guys, and there was nothing to be shy about. After all, Li Nao had been to public bathhouses frequently. Just as Li Nao was about to change his clothes, he realized something. The yellow sand under his feet surged, and a fitting room was built for him. Li Nao didn't expect Black to be so thoughtful. At this moment, Li Nao suddenly remembered. Black seemed to be rumored to be a spirit chi professional that wasn't even 20 years old. Now that he was in close contact with Black, Li Nao could faintly feel Black's youthful aura. Li Nao thanked Black again. He took the blue and white spirit chi clothing that Black had given him and entered the fitting room that was made of yellow sand. Li Nao knew that Black had dragged him into the yellow sand castle. It was because Black wanted to protect him. He wanted him to enter the Radiance 100 Sequence like Gao Feng back then. Li Nao was very grateful for this. It could be said that Black had casually given him an opportunity. During this year, he had worked hard to increase his strength. Then, he had nurtured the new contracted Fae. Chapter 1684. 1 year later, he wouldn't still be in the bottom 10 of the 100 Sequence. This time, he would be ranked so low. It was mainly because Li Nao wanted to rush up at the last moment but didn't succeed. In a situation where the ranking didn't change, he was targeted. Thus, this situation was created. Li Nao was grateful to Black, but Lin Yuan didn't think so much. Lin Yuan watched the assessment for 2 days in the Yellow Sand Castle. There were at least 50 candidates in the assessment of the 100 sequence. They were all qualified to compete for the top 100 sequence. Lin Yuan didn't want to interfere too much with this. He wanted to let these 50 candidates compete freely. After all, the quota was limited. These 50 candidates with acceptable qualities needed to compete with each other to determine who was stronger. Those who passed the assessment in terms of willpower, belief, quality, communication ability, and other aspects. The final competition still had to return to strength. Li Nao's ability in all aspects was obviously much higher than these candidates. As for the other candidates who were in the top 100 in terms of leadership, they were the best. They were far inferior to Li Nao. Moreover, at least 4 of the top 100 sequence members had already started to conserve their spiritual power on the 3rd day. They were converging toward the core region. It was obvious that the 4 of them had the intention to join forces. This was an extremely rational choice, and it wasn't wrong. However, Li Nao's emotions weren't wrong either. In Lin Yuan's opinion, Li Nao, he was qualified to be a 100 sequence member. Therefore, Lin Yuan made a move without any hesitation. Lin Yuan's action made Iron Prison, who was on the 12 stone pillars, frown. Moon Empress, your disciple's action is equivalent to deciding on Li Nao. This kind of action is too unfair to the other candidate. When Cicada Cry heard Iron Prison's words, he couldn't help but hold his forehead. This Iron Prison was obviously willing to consume his lifespan for the Moon Empress. But why did he choose words that others weren't willing to listen to when he spoke? When Tianfeng heard Iron Prison's words, he kept the 2 peanuts in his hands and said, Iron Prison, anyone with a discerning eye can see that in the entire assessment, apart from the Moon Empress disciple and Cicada Cry's disciple, Li Nao's performance is the most outstanding, and his phase have the greatest potential. In the entire assessment, there is no such thing as fairness or unfairness. Now, 4 members of the top 100 sequence in the core region have joined forces. Is it fair to the other candidates? To put it bluntly, there are no external factors in this assessment. It's a test of personal strength. Black is using his own strength to protect Li Nao. In my opinion, there is nothing wrong with that. On the contrary, Black's behavior, in my opinion, is a leadership of a higher level than Li Nao. Black is screening talents for radiance. Tai Yu, I think you should accept a disciple. After having a disciple, your way of thinking and thinking will change. Your spirit items are all dragon type. Coiling Dragon Valley's old patriarch has successfully become an undying. It will take over Whale Ocean Trade's original position in radiance. Long Tao is very suitable to be your disciple. When I was studying the Coiled Dragon Valley, I also studied Long Tao. Long Tao is the same as you. Both of you are eccentric. When he grows up, he will definitely be a hermaphrodite. Hearing Tianfeng's words, Iron Prison's face darkened. You're the eccentric one. You're the eccentric one. However, Tianfeng's words still touched Iron Prison. Recently, his disagreement with the Moon Empress, Night Leaning Moon, Chef Supreme, and the others in the Imperial Court Council had become more and more serious. Even the Cicada's Cries often disagreed with his opinions. Could this be because the 3 of them accepted disciples? Iron Prison looked at the silver stone pillar beside him. His gaze landed on Long Tao, who was sandwiched between Lu Jie and Xia Qing. After looking at Long Tao for a long time, Iron Prison turned his head. Then, he focused his eyes and pondered. No one knew what he was thinking in his heart. At this moment, the Star Web was also in an uproar because of Black's operation. However, unlike the unfair argument that Iron Prison made, the Star Web was unanimously favorable. Dusty love for the past. When Li Nao was about to be pierced by the horned demon, I cried. But why did Li Nao fall into the quicksand? Black can't be giving Li Nao the final blow, right? Yuchisi, hey! What are you thinking about? If Black wants to give Li Nao the final blow, he can just make the yellow sand boil again. Except for those who can fly, everyone will go underground. Moreover, the yellow sand castle can rise into the air, which means that Black's sand attribute source-type lifeform has a certain ability to stay in the air. Black obviously saved Li Nao. Tai Chi Guzheng, my son saved my new husband. Now that's touching. Is Li Nao in the yellow sand castle now? Yu Xing, Black did a great job. I was only a passerby fan of Black before, but now I'm a fan of Black. Rascal Rabbit 88. Except for Black and Gao Feng, among everyone present, no one is more suitable to become a member of the 100 sequence than Li Nao. I admit that I didn't think highly of Li Nao at the beginning, but Li Nao's contribution to the team made me unable to ignore him. It could be said that these people who were watching the 100 sequence selection, most of them had heroism. At the same time, after watching this assessment for 3 days, everyone had poured their emotions into it. It was like watching a TV series. After watching it, no one wanted the main character to die. It was different from the enthusiastic atmosphere on the Star Web. At this moment, in the central area of the assessment space, the final stage of the battle was being carried out. Gao Feng was no longer restoring spirit chi for others. While the 2 spirit spring lilies were constantly restoring spirit chi for Gao Feng, the breeze hibiscus was using its normal skill, guard breeze. Around the high wind, a wind belt was formed that completely blocked the high wind. The breeze hibiscus was a Diamond X/Fantasy V Fey after all. The guard breeze belt didn't have any offensive ability, but any elemental attacks that hit the wind belt would be blown away. The compressed wind elements would be blown away. If someone attacked Gao Feng at close range, if someone attacked the wind belt, they would be immediately blown away by the wind belt. At present, the exotic beast swarm had shrunk the central area to less than 300 square meters. There were less than 100 people who were still fighting. Among them, there were a few candidates who attacked Gao Feng. The wind that was guarding Gao Feng was blown away by nearly 500 meters. They fell into the beast tide. They became delicious food sent to the alien insects and devils. Gao Feng picked up the 2 spirit spring lilies and the breeze hibiscus from the ground and walked toward the center. Those who saw Gao Feng had a tacit understanding to avoid him. The 400 sequence members who teamed up earlier. He watched as Gao Feng stood in the center. The 4 of them thought for a moment and simply guarded around Gao Feng. They occupied the most advantageous position. Chapter 1685. The current Gao Feng was clearly saying that he wouldn't attack anyone else. The rest of you don't have to fight with me. Gao Feng, who was standing in the middle of the exam, was like a starting point. The 400 sequence members used this spot as the center and entrusted their backs to each other. Everyone faced one side and used their phase to defend. At that moment, the 4 former 100 sequence members' phase drew a line not far in front. The meaning was obvious. If anyone crossed this line, they would be attacked by 4 members of the top 100 sequence. In these 3 days of hard work, the few remaining members of the 100 sequence had revealed their full strength. Each of them had a platinum/fantasy breed Fey. And there was more than one. It could be said that these 100 sequence members, they were the top of the candidates in terms of combat power. Now that they were using their phase to defend with all their might, no one dared to cross that line. Once they crossed this line, they would be attacked by the platinum/fantasy breed phase. If everyone attacked together, it would be fine. If one of them stepped forward, they would be hit. They could basically bid farewell to the 100 sequence exam. Right now, the remaining 100 people felt that they had a chance to be selected into the 100 sequence. Once they became a 100 sequence member, not only would they bring glory to their family, but they would also be able to hold their heads high. They would also be able to bring an excellent future to themselves. Once they became a 100 sequence member, the resources they obtained would be completely different from the past. According to the management, within a year of becoming a Radiance 100 sequence member, the Radiance Sacred Hall would pour in at least 50 million Radiance dollars. This amount of resources would allow them to obtain a bronze/epic Fae. They would also be able to upgrade this bronze/epic Fae into a platinum/fantasy breed. Of course, there was a prerequisite. He needed to comprehend a willpower rune himself. Comprehending a willpower rune was a difficult problem for most people. However, it was not difficult for the 140 people present. In fact, many of them already had comprehended a willpower rune in their mind. However, there were no suitable high-quality bronze Faes. Becoming a Radiance 100 sequence member was a way to rise to the top. They had fought until now, and no one was willing to give up. Li Nao had already changed his clothes and walked out of the yellow sand fitting room. He arrived in front of Lin Yuan. Lin Yuan was watching the dispute in the camp through the window of the yellow sand castle. Li Nao walked to Lin Yuan's side and stood side by side with him. Lin Yuan had already stored Li Nao in the yellow sand castle. He had already stored Red Thorn into the Spirit Lock spatial zone. Otherwise, Li Nao would be staring blankly at Red Thorn, who had not advanced to the mythical stage but had 3 pairs of wings. He would not be able to analyze the situation in the battlefield. Black, no one can break through the wind wall that Gao Feng used in the central region. Gao will be able to obtain a spot. Zhang Zihao, Du Su, and Su will be able to be stronger than the rest. The 4 of them have the geographical advantage. Therefore, I should be able to obtain 4 spots. Including you and me, there are only 3 spots left for the entire assessment. Li have Li Feng. 3 to 5 years. Apart from Black and Gao Feng, Li Nao, Zhang Zihao, Du Su, and the other 5 former Radiance 100 sequence members should be able to snatch a seat. How are the rest going to fight for the remaining 3 seats? The competition is too intense. A young man with a dream. I think so too. In terms of individual strength, Gao Feng, Zhang Zihao, and Du Su can be considered the strongest 5 in the core region. A few of them are similar to Du Su and Zhang Zihao, but if they want to rush to the center region, they will be targeted by the other 4 and will be immediately eliminated. Zhang Zihao, Du Su, and the others are the first to join forces in the core region. What a good plan! Happy Water Source. Du Su and Feng Tsong's Fei abilities are too limited. Feng Tsong's poison-type Fei controls a slow-acting poison. It has area of effect, but it takes too long and is not good at defense. Du Su's main Fei, the blade-armored tyrant crocodile, has low intelligence. Once it enters a berserk state, it will not listen to Du Su's commands. Compared to the others, I think Du Su and Feng Tsong are not qualified. Lin Yuan's thoughts were completely different from Li Nao's. He stored Red Thorn into the Spirit Lock spatial zone. The 8 long ribbons of the flower sea in the insect tide had already become rootless sources. The sea of flowers could be adjusted by devouring the alien insect. However, without the energy supply, the sea of flowers would soon be washed away by the insect tide. By then, the pressure in the core region would multiply. Everyone would stake it all and want to occupy a position in the core region. At that time, let alone Zhang Zihao, Du Su, and the other top 100 sequence members. Even if Lin Yuan went down alone, he would definitely be targeted by everyone. In fact, he might not even have to wait for the 8 flower belts to collapse. The defense formed by the 4 of them would be targeted and attacked by the other examinees. In less than 10 minutes, a voice suddenly echoed in the camp. The alien beast tide has become more ferocious than before. According to my phase observation, half of the 8 flower belts have been devoured by the alien insects. Soon, the pressure on us will increase greatly. If we don't go to the core region, everyone will be eliminated. Instead of being eliminated just like that, everyone might as well fight for it. This statement immediately stirred up the emotions of the examinees present. There were only over 80 people left now. Instead of fighting for those 3 positions, it was better to drag the 4 top 100 sequence members into the water. Everyone would fight for 7 positions together. At that moment, someone shouted again. In the previous 100 sequence selections, there were only a total of 3 or 4 top 100 sequence members who were selected. But this time, if we let 5 of them return to the ranks of the 100 sequence, doesn't that mean that our batch of newcomers is not strong enough? This is so shameful. These two voices made the expressions of Zhang Zihao, Du Su, Feng Tsong, and the others darken. It was obvious that someone wanted to target them and the others. They also knew how to win people's hearts. They borrowed the strength of the group. Before they could speak, many examinees had already used their phase to cross the originally drawn line. They launched an attack on them and the others. Among them, 100 Poison's Feng Tsong, who was ranked 96th in the top 100 sequence, was the most miserable. The main Fey, the blood-poison dragon centipede, sprayed all of its poisonous mist. However, these examinees were not afraid of it at all. The blood-poison dragon centipede's poison acted on blood. After being infected by the poison for a period of time, the blood would coagulate. The life forms would die from blood coagulation. Chapter 1686. When they were fighting against the mutated beast horde, Feng Tsong's group was very strong. There was no need for other combat class spirit chi professionals in Feng Tsong's area. Feng Tsong led a group of defense-type spirit chi professionals and let the blood-venomous drake release poisonous fog in a large area. It infected all the insects and demons in the area. Then, the defense-type spirit chi professionals blocked the attack of the insect horde. In 3 minutes, the insects and demons would die from blood coagulation. If it was before, the candidates would be very afraid of Feng Kong. But now there were only 70 to 80 people left. Not to mention 3 minutes, the battle would end in 2 minutes. No matter how strong Zhang Zihao, Feng Tsong, and the others were, they couldn't fight against so many. Under the group attack of the phase, only Zhang Zihao was strong enough to block the attack. Of the other 3, 2 were directly eliminated. One was beaten until he didn't even have the strength to get up. Soon, he was finished off by someone else. Zhang Zihao saw that the others still wanted to attack him, so he immediately shouted, "Thorny silk white vine, burn your vitality and form a vine net here." Hearing Zhang Zihao's command, the vines around Zhao Zihao suddenly grew crazily with Zhang Zihao as the core. The vines bound each other. They formed a vine pile about 20 meters tall. Zhang Zihao was a defense-type spirit chi professional. Using the thorny silk white vine to cast the vine entanglement was Zhang Zihao's strongest defensive ability. Zhang Zihao was sure that everyone didn't have much spirit chi left. Without 5 minutes, they wouldn't be able to break through this 4-meter-thick vine. He summoned himself from these vines. It could be said that he had used this move. Zhang Zihao was 100% sure that he could get a spot in the sequence of 100. When the others saw this, they quickly filled the remaining 3 spots beside Gao Feng. No one thought of attacking Gao Feng. Previously, when the skills were thrown at Zhao Zihao, Feng Tsong, Du Su, and the others, Gao Feng was in the middle of these people. When these people were dodging, it could be said that Gao Feng was the one who was attacked the most. The air current around Gao Feng blocked all the elemental skills and blasted them back, injuring many examinees. Some unlucky candidates were directly killed by the skills that were bounced back. Therefore, in the face of such a powerful Gao Feng, no one was willing to look for trouble. When the candidates in the core area were fighting, the examinees in the outer circle were waiting for the people in the middle to fight. He would then step forward and reap the benefits of the fisherman. However, a sudden change occurred. These examinees didn't even have time to react. Then, they were devoured by the beast tide. For some reason, the beast tide suddenly became several times more ferocious than before. It was as if there was something behind those exotic beasts that was pushing them forward. He looked at the exotic beast that was about to crash into him. One of the female examinees who was covered in mud hugged her broken arm. He said to his heavily injured main Fey, "Iron Baboon, throw me into the air shield next to Gao Feng in the central area." The iron baboon had just thrown the woman out when it was devoured by the beast tide. The woman made a beautiful parabola and smashed into the air shield beside Gao Feng. It directly collided with the air shield. At this moment, the woman felt as if her internal organs were on fire. In the star web duel, a function of 100% pain was introduced. This time, in the sequence of 100 assessment, the pain function was also used. Therefore, even if she suffered a small injury in the star web space, the feeling of being injured was exactly the same as in the outside world. After the woman collided with the air shield, she was thrown out by the air shield. Just as the woman was about to smash into the beast tide, the woman was suddenly teleported out of the assessment space. At this moment, the examinees standing in the Radiance Sacred Hall opened their eyes. They realized that they had already returned to the real world. They knew that the Radiance 100 sequence assessment was completely over. At this moment, there was a sudden cheer from the crowd. The person who let out this cheer was the woman who was about to smash into the beast tide. I didn't die, but the assessment was over. This meant that I had been selected as a member of the sequence of 100. After the examinees were eliminated, they still had to observe the assessment. Therefore, the examinees were very clear about everyone's performance. The examinees subconsciously looked around. They wanted to see if there were any experts around them who had performed extremely well in the assessment. Lin Yuan and Gao Feng stood together, and they were quickly discovered by the people around them. When they saw the mask on Lin Yuan's face, these examinees were slightly stunned. It turned out that the fake fan that they thought was Lin Yuan was actually Lin Yuan himself. These examinees immediately felt that Lin Yuan was actually Lin Yuan. However, they immediately became excited. Their eyes kept looking at Lin Yuan and Gao Feng. Gao Feng was only famous because of this assessment. However, Lin Yuan's fame wasn't just that. Long before he participated in the sequence of 100, Lin Yuan had already shown signs of being the most popular person among the younger generation on Star Web. He could almost be considered the leader of the younger generation. This was the first time Lin Yuan had appeared in reality. If this wasn't the Radiance Sacred Hall, envoys from the two major federations were observing the ceremony, and the Supremes were watching from above. Many people would probably want to ask Lin Yuan for his autograph. Li Nai, Zhang Zihao, and the other 11 members of the sequence of 100 stood together. At this moment, only Li Nai and Zhang Zihao had smiles on their faces. This was because only Li Nai and Zhang Zihao could return to the sequence of 100. They had protected the glory of being a member of the sequence of 100. The other members of the sequence of 100 felt a little upset. However, there was nothing to be upset about in such an assessment. At this moment, Lu Wenqing's voice sounded from the golden stone pillar. This assessment of the sequence of 100 is officially over. Next, the last 10 people of the assessment will mount the jade red cranes and ascend the silver stone pillar. Lu Wenqing's words caused the examinees to hold their breaths involuntarily. 10 giant feathered cranes with cinnabar on their heads, golden feathers on their bodies, jade patterns on their backs, and a jade rui in their mouth. They flapped their wings and flew toward the square formation where the candidates were. Then, they flew separately to a position in the square formation. They accurately landed in front of the last 10 candidates. They looked at the jade red cranes that were crawling in front of them. Lin Yuan and Gao Feng raised their feet and used the crane's wings to ascend onto the back of the jade red cranes. After Lin Yuan and Gao Feng stabilized themselves, the jade red cranes flapped their wings and flew away. They flew toward the silver stone pillar. According to their performance in the assessment space, the jade red cranes automatically stopped beside the silver stone pillar where they should stop. Lin Yuan looked at the 9 empty golden stone pillars on his left side. He stood on the stone pillar that represented the Radiance 100 sequence's 91st position. Lin Yuan stood on the silver stone pillar and looked through the silver mask. He looked in the direction of the Freedom Federation's envoys and thought to himself. The appetizer was over, and the real collision was about to begin. Chapter 1687. Beside Lin Yuan was Gao Feng. Gao Feng landed on the 92nd stone pillar of the Radiance 100 sequence. It was followed by Li Nao and Zhang Zihao. The last one was the 100th member of the Radiance 100 sequence. It was the air shield that had been thrown by the iron-skinned baboon toward Gao Feng. She was bounced back by the air shield and fell toward the girl in the insect tide. It was the time when she bounced back and forth in the air that allowed her to enter the 100th rank of the Radiance 100 sequence. The new 100 sequence members climbed up the stone pillars. The silver stone pillars were finally filled with the younger generation prodigies of the Radiance 100 sequence. Those candidates who had failed due to various reasons. Looking at the 100 figures on the golden stone pillars, they might be depressed. But they couldn't help but applaud sincerely. Among them, Li Nao and Zhang Zihao looked at each other. As a member who had participated in 200 sequence selections, the last round of the arena battles would determine the final 10 people. It was rare to get the sincere recognition of the same batch of candidates. This was because Spirit Chi professionals' talents restrained each other. If they could find a suitable target, there were too many precedents of the weak defeating the strong. Many people felt that if they could meet an opponent that restrained them, they would have the chance to advance all the way to the 100 sequence, to become a 100 sequence member. And now, in this kind of assessment in such a large environment, everyone did their best. In these 3 days, everyone no longer checked and balanced each other but cooperated. After spending 3 days together, the examinees were truly impressed by the 10 members of the 100 sequence that had been selected. Even Yu Tiantian, who had relied on luck to become the 100th 100 sequence member. She also stood at the very end. Yu Tiantian's combat ability was slightly weaker than the other candidate. But wasn't it Yu Tiantian's plan to let the iron-skinned baboon throw her into the sky? At this moment, the Star Web was filled with cheers. The Star Web reporters who had been watching the entire assessment. While he was watching, he had already finished writing his script. As soon as the assessment ended, he filled in the order of the 100 sequence members and sent the manuscript out. These posts from the Star Web reporters quickly occupied all the major forums and Tieba. However, at this moment of cheering, not many people went to read this first-hand information. This was because everyone who was able to log onto the Star Web was someone who had personally experienced the 100 sequence assessment. With his eyes, he saw through the entire process of the test. There was really no need to understand the situation of the test through the Star Web reporter's post. Originally, Lu Shuang and Poison Beauty were still lamenting about the live broadcast. Because of Black, he did not show his face in the Yellow Sand Castle. As a result, the number of viewers in his live streaming room was not as many as he had imagined. In the meantime, Lu Shuang and Poison Beauty switched to Li Nao's and Gao Feng's perspectives. However, after the assessment ended, the popularity of Li Nao and Poison Beauty's live streaming room instantly exploded. The viewers who were watching Li Nao and Poison Beauty's live streaming were waiting to see the Black angle from the beginning. After Black became the 91st of the 100 sequence, he returned to the livestream that he had been waiting for. A heated discussion ensued. Hui Bulage, I said before that Black will definitely be selected into the Radiance 100 sequence. I was right to come here and poke my eyes. Deranged. Black can become a member of the 100 sequence. Is there a need for you to say that? Anyone with a discerning eye could tell. Black awesome. Not only did he become a member of the 100 sequence, but he also brought 2 people with him. Emocia, please. Gao Feng doesn't need to be a black belt at all. If Gao Feng didn't wait for Black at the beginning and rush to the central area, he wouldn't have been the first to encounter the beast tide. If Li Nao had a bit of selfishness, he wouldn't have been in such a difficult situation. Tai Chi Guzheng. No matter what, Black and Gao Feng are stronger than the rest. They are not on the same level as Li Nao and Zhang Zihao, who are ranked 93rd and 94th. Shin Wuyua 1. There is no need to trample on them. Everyone is a top genius of the Radiance 100's younger generation. I am very curious now. What will Black's title be? The titles of the Radiance 100 sequence members were not decided by themselves at the beginning. It was the Starweb's netizens who came up with the titles on the Radiance Sacred Halls forum. Hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of titles were displayed in the Radiance Sacred Halls forum for every 100 sequence member. After 48 hours, the title with the most votes would be obtained. This was the initial title of the 100 sequence members. Of course, if the 100 sequence members were not satisfied, they could make changes. Just like Zhao Xiaochun back then, because she was in the 100 sequence selection, she had been eating non-stop. One moment she was eating pig trotters, the next moment she was eating drumsticks. After a match, she could eat 3 pig trotters. She could eat 5 drumsticks. Therefore, she was voted to obtain the title of Gluttony. As a result, when Zhao Xiaochun found out about her title, the next day she applied to the Radiance Sacred Halls officials. She changed Gluttony to Anorexia. Although the Starweb's official title had changed, when Zhao Xiaochun was mentioned. In the memories of ordinary people, Zhao Xiaochun's title was still Gluttony, not Anorexia. Chu Ci was in the Return from Faraway Manor, sitting with the mother of Bloodbath and Endless Summer. Through the Starweb, she was watching Lin Yuan, who was standing on the silver stone pillar. Chu Ci felt that these 10 months were like a dream. 10 months ago, Lin Yuan was still a thin and weak youth, who could barely maintain a small face store. Back then, Lin Yuan had done his best to maintain a living. He had worked hard to save up for his tuition fees. He had thought of the very least. He had to provide for his Spirit Chi Professional University. Chu Ci had helped others write workbooks in school. She had tried her best to think of how to earn more money to buy more medicine for Lin Yuan. However, ever since Lin Yuan had come to visit her at school, after he had given her a bronze sharp iron horn bowl, everything had changed. Chu Ci did not know how Lin Yuan had become a creation master and how he had obtained so many precious resources for her. She did not know how Lin Yuan, who did not even have the talent to become a Spirit Chi professional, had made it into the 100 sequence. However, Chu Ci knew that along the way, her brother, Lin Yuan, must have suffered a lot. Looking at Lin Yuan, Chu Ci's eyes could not help but turn red. Her heart was filled with pride and pride. Apart from Chu Ci, no one in this world knew how difficult it had been for Lin Yuan in the past. Lin Yuan had become a 100 sequence member. The mother of Bloodbath and Endless Summer might be happy for Lin Yuan. However, they did not feel anything else. In the eyes of the mother of Bloodbath and Endless Summer, Lin Yuan should be standing in this position. If not for the fact that he was a new 100 sequence member, he would not be ranked before 90th. Lin Yuan could compete with Lu Jie for the first position. Lu Jie turned to look at where Lin Yuan was. In a sense, Lu Jie was now. He was standing in the same row as Lin Yuan. End of this chapter. Chapter 1688. Next, he might even fight alongside Lin Yuan. Thinking of this, Lu Jie's serious face revealed a trace of throbbing emotions. This palpitation was the pleasant surprise of being able to fight alongside Lin Yuan. Secondly, Lu Jie had just received feedback from the Insect Queen. The Blade Queen Bee was showing signs of metamorphosis. The Blade Queen Bee had already comprehended the willpower rune when it had just fused with the source-type item Cocoon Demon Embryo. Between the Insect Queen and the Blade Queen Bee, the Insect Queen was only controlled by the mental poison. Therefore, the Blade Queen Bee's level was not suppressed. In other words, as long as the Insect Queen allowed the Blade Queen Bee to evolve as an insect-type carcinoma Fae, the Blade Queen Bee would attract a special world cleansing. It would then become a myth-breed insect-type carcinoma Fae. Under the effect of the Cocoon Demon Embryo, she became a demon. Letting the Blade Queen Bee evolve on the spot was indeed risky. However, this method would also increase their chances of winning. A Diamond X/Legend Blade Queen Bee compared to a Diamond X/Fantasy V Blade Queen Bee. The difference was like heaven and earth. A Diamond X/Fantasy V Blade Queen Bee was compared to a Suzerain/Myth I Blade Queen Bee. There will be an even bigger gap. In the information that Hui Yao had collected, there was no precedent of an insect-type carcinoma fey transforming into a demon spirit. However, Lu Jie had heard Lin Yuan mention it before. When a carcinoma fey transformed into a demonic spirit, the number of wings wouldn't be small. Lin Yuan had said that because he had fused the plant-type carcinoma fey, the sea burial lotus flower, with the source-type fairy's heart, it allowed the sea burial lotus flower to transform into a demon. After the sea burial lotus flower transformed into a demon, it had 3 pairs of wings and was now a 6-winged demon. The sea burial lotus flower was able to achieve such a transformation. Firstly, it was related to the pure spirit chi in the spirit lock spatial zone. Secondly, it was related to the coral jades with insect patterns. It was the coral jade that had allowed the sea burial lotus flower's bloodline to evolve. The Blade Queen Bee did not have pure spirit chi, nor did it have anything that could help its bloodline evolve. However, after the transformation, it would probably reach the level of a 4-winged demon. Once the 12 cocoon demon embryos were all used by him. The insect queen, who had just become a 6-winged demon, was leading 12 4-winged demons. Following the transformation of the insect-type carcinoma fey into a demon, his bloodline had been continuously enhanced. Lu Jie felt that as long as he kept working hard, there was a chance to keep up with Lin Yuan's footstep. At this time, within the Freedom Federation's diplomatic mission, Li Yang looked at Lian Shen, who was sitting beside him, and said, "Pity Goddess, our Freedom Federation's envoy will be challenging the Radiance Federation's 10 new 100 sequence members. At the same time, pull down a few disciples of His Holiness Hui Yao." I do not know. Before Li Yang could finish speaking, he was interrupted by the Pity God. "You are in charge of these things, so you don't need to tell me. As long as nothing goes wrong with Qianyu, I don't care about anything else." It could be said that the goddess of pity would come here. It was all because of Qianyu. When Goddess Lian received news about Qianyu, she was afraid that Qianyu would be in danger. Otherwise, with Goddess Lian's troublesome personality, she would not have made this trip. Wasn't swimming in the cold pool water mirror behind the Freedom Temple more interesting than coming to the Radiance 100 sequence to watch the Radiance 100 sequence test? Qianyu was seen by the Pity Goddess as her future. She would not object to Qianyu's participation. However, if Qianyu was in danger, she would not have any scruples. She would definitely make a move and save Qianyu. She would ascend to the god position and evolve her sacred source lifeform to 11 star. As long as she could remove the curse, she would be qualified to peak at a higher path. Li Yang was a little displeased when he was interrupted by the Pity Goddess, but he didn't say anything unnecessary. It was as though Li Yang was used to the Pity Goddess interrupting him. Now that the Pity Goddess did not care, Li Yang decided to act according to his original plan. Li Yang said to Yanling, Kai Hua, and Yu Changjian, "The 3 of you get ready first." Li Yang then looked at Qianyu and said, "I hope you can follow the original plan and pull down Lu Yifan. Then, apart from Gao Feng, pull down 1 or 2 more disciples of His Holiness Hui Yao. You decide for yourself what you should do. If you can pull down Lu Yifan, apart from Gao Feng, pull down 2 more disciples of His Holiness Hui Yao. After this, I can give you a 7-star artifact that you can use in my name. If you don't pull down Lu Yifan, apart from Gao Feng, you can pull down 3 of His Holiness Hui Yao's disciples. I can also give you that 7-star artifact." As Li Yang spoke, he looked at Black, who was standing at Radiance 100 sequence number 91. Li Yang did not know who Black was. However, in Li Yang's opinion, Black's strength had reached the standard of His Holiness Hui Yao's disciples. Qianyu heard this and was moved. Previously, Qian Yu had been in a life-and-death situation several times. Every time, Her Holiness Goddess Pity, who cared for him, would save him. In the Freedom Federation, Qian Yu was a freedom envoy. He had learned to ensure his own interests before doing anything. The best way to ensure his own interests was to be able to participate in this competition. Obtain Li Yang's promise of a 7-star artifact. Qian Yu actually did not want to pull down Lu Yifan. This was because Qian Yu had fought with Lu Yifan before. He knew Lu Yifan's strength, especially Lu Yifan's troublesome desolation bloodline Fei. Therefore, compared to pulling down Lu Yifan, Qian Yu was more willing to pull down 3 more of His Holiness Hui Yao's disciples. However, Qian Yu was clear in his heart. If he went up, he would be the Freedom Federation's freedom envoy. His target would be Lu Yifan, who was also a Radiance envoy. If he proposed to challenge Lu Yifan, the Radiance faction could only agree because of their reputation. However, he wanted to challenge His Holiness Hui Yao's younger generation disciples. He was 3 to 4 years older than His Holiness Hui Yao. Furthermore, his Fei had been promoted to myth breed. If the Radiance faction agreed, it would be no different from sending His Holiness Hui Yao's disciples to their death. As a genius of the younger generation, 3 years was a huge gap. His Holiness Li Yang might have given him 2 choices, but only the first one could be chosen. Before making his choice, Qian Yu looked at Her Holiness Goddess Pity, who cared for him, and asked, "Teacher, I would like to ask you to help me see Black's age. How old is he exactly?" Hearing this, Her Holiness Goddess said directly, "Black's age cannot be more than 19. Hearing Her Holiness Goddess's words, the worry in Qian Yu's heart instantly disappeared. He took a step forward and said in a clear voice, "The younger generation of the Radiance Hui Yao clan is indeed full of talents. While the Freedom Federation's envoy is here to observe the ceremony, we would like to have a friendly match with the newly selected 100 sequence members of the Radiance Hui Yao clan." End of this chapter. Chapter 1689. Qian Yu had always felt that he couldn't see through the darkness. In other words, although Black had used a shocking method in the assessment, he was still able to defeat Black. However, the information that was revealed was too little. If Black's true age was stuck at the upper age limit of the Radiance 100 sequence like 28 or 29, in that case, Qian Yu would have to consider it carefully. 28 or 29 years old, which was even older than him. If Hui Yao had really arranged it, it was highly likely that he had rashly pulled down Lu Yifan and the 2 disciples of His Holiness. Lu Yifan, the 2 disciples of His Holiness, Gao Feng and Black worked together against himself, Yan Ling, Kai Hua and Yu Changjian. It wouldn't be good if his side flipped over. Qian Yu knew that Her Holiness the Goddess of Pity was looking after him. He had already grasped his life providence. Experts who had grasped fate could tell the age of other life forms at a glance. That was the reason why Qian Yu had made such a decision before the competition. He wanted Goddess Lian to help him look at Black's age. After learning that Black was not even 19 years old, Qian Yu no longer took Black seriously. As a 19-year-old spirit chi professional, no matter how talented he was still a genius. How strong could he be? Yan Ling, Kai Hua and Yu Changjian could become His Majesty's caretakers. Among the members of the independent 100 sequence, which one of them was not a genius? Qian Yu was hesitant at first. At this moment, Qian Yu was ready to drag Lu Yifan down without any scruples, and 2 of His Holiness disciples. His side's advantage lay in Yan Ling, Kai Hua, and Yu Changjian's sacred source lifeforms. Sacred source lifeforms needed to be able to link with each other. It was not an easy task. This was the first time in the Freedom Federation's history that 3 sacred source lifeforms were able to interact with one another. After all, the number of sacred source lifeforms was too small. Unlike source-type items, most King Stage powerhouses could easily obtain them with their own strength. The Radiance Federation had unique, desolate bloodline phase. In the Freedom Federation, every single person favored by His Holiness had a contract with a demon from the Devil's Church. The uniqueness of a desolate bloodline Fae was that it could control a certain power of nature. It was similar to the spirit of heavenly favor. However, in terms of growth, it did not rely on the heavens and earth like the chosen spirit. Instead, it had to be cultivated artificially. They were creatures that were extremely compatible with nature. As for the Freedom Federation, the demons that originated from the Devil's Church possessed ominous powers. He focused on strengthening his physical body and soul. Ghosts that had strengthened their bodies had powerful combat technique, as well as all kinds of strange abilities. It was a monster that focused on the soul. It was good at seducing people, attacking their minds and causing them to fall. It was impossible to guard against. The people from the other federations talked about the Radiance Federation's desolate bloodline phase and the Freedom Federation's monsters. Perhaps he was more afraid of the Freedom Federation's ghosts and monsters. The aura released by a desolate bloodline Fae would affect life forms of the same attribute or similar laws. It had an extremely strong suppressive force. This kind of suppression was still within the range of human understanding. However, the monster's ferocious appearance and ominous aura emanating from its body made Lin Fan feel uneasy. It gave people goosebumps. Upon hearing Qian Yu's words, the examinees present, the members of the 100 sequence on the silver stone pillars, and the viewers on Star Web were all stunned. It instantly boiled over. The examinees at the venue and the Star Web audience, his thoughts were not much different. He was looking forward to the friendly match proposed by Freedom Envoy Qian Yu, who was leading the Freedom Federation's diplomatic mission. He wanted to see which side was stronger, the Radiance Federation's geniuses or the Freedom Federation's geniuses. It could be said that in the hearts of these examinees and the Star Web audience, they all had a sense of honor and mission. There was an intense discussion on Star Web. Deep Mountain Oldly. I originally wanted to go to the Radiance Sacred Hall's newly established Black's personal page and enter the title that I thought of. I was just about to leave the live streaming room, but I didn't expect to see the friendly match proposed by the Freedom Federation. Clarity. Go Radiance Federation. Kill them. Nicholas Zhangqi. According to the rules of the other federations who came to the Radiance Federation to watch the ceremony in the past few years, those who participated in the friendly match were all new members of the 100 sequence. The people sent by the Freedom Federation's diplomatic mission will definitely be stronger. This time, Black should be able to reveal more phase. Mountain River Spirit. I'm looking forward to the match later. Since it's a friendly match, if it's based on friendship, both sides shouldn't use any killer moves, right? Amber Button. Impossible. The bet between the Freedom Federation and the Radiance Federation is full of the smell of gunpowder. I bet 5 Radiance dollars that this match might be under the guise of a friendly match, but the real situation is definitely not that simple. The Star Web's netizens and examinees were looking forward to the match. It was because these people didn't think very far. Those veteran factions and the members of the top factions who were paying attention to the current situation all knew. After the 100 sequence ended, the Freedom Federation's diplomatic mission had revealed its claws. They were ready to make a move on the Radiance Federation. This match was of great importance. These people's eyes were focused on Black, Gao Feng, Li Nao, Zhang Zihao, and the others. Their fists were clenched tightly. At such a time, the two major federations had to wrestle with the strength of the younger generation. Under normal circumstances, winning or losing wasn't that important. After all, the duel wasn't between the current Radiance envoys or Freedom envoys. However, the Freedom Federation's diplomatic mission had proposed the match in the Radiance Federation's royal capital. It was also carried out when the Radiance 100 selection had just ended and everyone was watching. If the Radiance Federation lost this match to the entire Radiance Federation, it would have a huge impact. Apart from Lu Jie, Xia Qing, and Gao Feng, the 100 sequence members who were standing on the silver stone pillar, the others furrowed their brows. Lu Jie, Xia Qing, Lin Yuan, and Gao Feng already knew that this conflict was bound to happen. Long Tao was from the Coiled Dragon Valley, a top faction. Among the 100 sequence, half of them were members of the top factions and veteran factions. These people had previously guessed that the Freedom Federation's diplomatic mission would make a move after the 100 sequence selection ended. But guesses were just guesses. When the real situation happened, these people couldn't help but feel their hearts in their throat. As members of the 100 sequence, everyone held onto the Radiance Federation's consciousness in their hearts. Therefore, these people knew that the friendly match proposed by the Freedom Federation could only be won and not lost. Even if they had to risk their lives, they had to protect the Radiance Federation's glory. Qian Yu's eyes were looking straight at the 13 supremacies who were standing on the golden stone pillar. He seemed to be waiting for the 13 supremacies to give him a response. However, the 13 supremacies didn't have the intention to bother with Qian Yu. At that moment, Lu Yifan, who was standing on the 7-colored stone pillar, spoke in a clear voice. The Radiance Federation will accept the Freedom Federation's challenge. The rules of the challenge have always been set by the party that issued the challenge. How do you want to compete? Your Freedom Federation can just say it. Chapter 1690. Lu Yifan was originally in seclusion in the desolate mystic realm. He was preparing to participate in the 10,000 States Convention for the last time in 2 years. The 10,000 States Convention was originally attended by 2 Federation envoys. The previous Federation envoys were the main team members, and the younger generation envoys were the substitute. During the previous 10,000 States Convention, Lu Yifan had been a substitute. In the Star Web test space, the Radiance 100 sequence test lasted for 3 days. In the eyes of many spectators, this test was already very long. To every examinee's mentality, this was a huge test. That was because these people did not know what the 10,000 States Convention was like. Every 10 years, the 10,000 States Convention would be held on an uninhabited continent. The size of this continent was definitely incomparable to the Radiance continent. However, compared to the Agon continent next to the Radiance continent, it was basically 1/5 the size of the Divine Wood Federation. At that time, each federation would have 30 contestants, who would represent their federation on this continent to compete. There were many ways to compete. There were simple 1-on-1 arena battles, 2-on-2 team battles, and 5-on-5 team battles. In the arena battles, each person could only go on stage once. There were many things to pay attention to. They had to pay attention to the strategy between the entire team. After the complicated arena, 1-on-1 and team battles, every Federation member would be teleported to any location on the continent. At that time, the Federation members would develop on this continent and attack each other. The main competition was which Federation occupied more land on this continent. This assessment would last for a full 6 months. Previously, as a substitute, Lu Yifan had seen how harsh the 10,000 States Convention test was. To put it bluntly, the arena battles were a competition to reduce the number of people. In the previous 10,000 States Convention, during the arena battles, one of the main team members, a Radiance envoy, was seriously injured. 3 members of the Radiance Knights were dead. No one from the substitute team was injured. This was because the main team of Radiance did not allow substitutes to go on stage. It was just to let the substitutes see the world. After the 10,000 States Convention, the previous Radiance envoy retired with honor. All of them entered the land of Radiance for seclusion. After another 2 years, Lu Yifan saw his destiny. Therefore, Lu Yifan was actually quite happy that the Freedom Federation could be this demon. It would let the younger generation of Radiance feel the malice from other federations. Lu Yifan stared at Black and Gao Feng. Since Gao Feng was accepted as a disciple of Cicada Cry, he definitely had more tricks up his sleeve. Therefore, in Lu Yifan's eyes, Gao Feng, a pure support, was a little more special. He could not become a Radiant Glory envoy. There would always be a position in the Radiant Light Knight. Lu Yifan did not know about Black's situation. However, Lu Yifan was full of expectations for Black. After all, Black had broken the record set by the guy with the poker face. This was enough to prove Black's talent. When Qian Yu heard what Lu Yifan said, his face revealed an unbridled smile. Since that's the case, let me, the challenger, make the request. Why don't you come down and play with me? We'll lead our teams and have a competition together. The friendly match that Qian Yu mentioned was actually just a superficial project. If the friendship between the two great federations was truly deep, everyone was already drinking and chatting merrily. Why was there a need for a competition in the name of friendship? In the end, Lu Yifan did not give him a chance to save face. He made the topic clear. If it was before, when only Li Su was around. In the Radiance Federation's territory, even as the third-ranked Freedom Envoy, Qian Yu would never dare to say such a thing. But now, the situation was different from before. The arrival of Goddess Lian filled Qian Yu's heart with confidence. Qian Yu's words made the expressions of the 100 sequence members on the silver stone pillar change. The examinees and the audience watching the live broadcast on Star Web. They all fell into silence. Star Web was the only pastime of the Radiance Federation's citizens in the Spirit Chi Awakening era. It was even closely related to life itself. These people ran their own personal homepages on Star Web. They watched the live broadcast and hit the Star Web tower. Usually, when there was a lively scene, they would come to watch the fun. However, after Qian Yu said those words, the crowd was stunned. Those who originally planned to watch the friendly match and watch the fun all knew. This was no longer a lively scene. The Radiance 100 sequence members were the shining stars of the Radiance Federation. It could be said that 80% of the Star Web netizens had been fans of the previous 100 sequence members. In the Radiance Federation, Radiance envoys had the same status as Her Majesty. They were the backbone of Radiance. No matter what Qian Yu's identity was, even if Qian Yu was a freedom envoy. At this moment, he wanted to drag Lu Yifan off the stage, and it immediately ignited the anger of the Radiance Federation's people. A lucky little panda, what's going on this time? I gave you face, but you don't want it. You actually want to drag Lord Lu Yifan down. Kill them. Scar of Hidden Star, I'm so angry. During the match later, give it your all. Beat all the Freedom Federation's people until they are lying on the ground. Guoren, Black, I was such a fan of you before, and I don't have any other requests from you. No matter what, you have to use all your strength this time and beat the Freedom Federation's people down. Otherwise, I will turn from a male mother's fan to a hater. A sour and sweet self-knowledge. The Freedom Federation's envoy can't be up to something, right? Our 2-year agreement with the Freedom Federation is just around the corner. Why do I keep feeling that the Freedom Federation might be plotting something? The examinees who had been eliminated all turned their gazes towards the direction of the Freedom Federation's diplomatic mission. Qian Yu, who had participated in the 10,000 Nations Conference, could ignore the gazes of tens of thousands of geniuses. However, Yan Ling, Kai Hua, and Yu Changjian couldn't help but feel that the atmosphere was a little tense. Qian Yu wanted to drag Lu Yifan down, which was out of the expectations of the Radiance 13 Highnesses. However, at this time, no one would say anything. This was because as the Radiance Federation's third-ranked envoy, Lu Yifan was qualified to make a decision. Whether he should participate or not. How this match should be carried out. Upon hearing that, Lu Yifan said in a clear voice, I can participate. Under normal circumstances, the challenge match is between the last 10 sequence members and the other side's last 10 sequence members. Seeing that Lu Yifan had agreed. Suddenly, Qian Yu had a different idea in his mind. Yan Ling, Kai Hua, and Yu Changjian were indeed participating in this year's Independent 100 Sequence assessment. However, Yan Ling, Kai Hua, and Yu Changjian went on a killing spree. They directly worked together to eliminate half of the examinees. As a result, the independent 100-sequence examiners had no choice but to ask Yan Ling, Kai Hua, and Yu Changjian to withdraw from the assessment midway. The three of them were ranked 88th, 89th, and 90th. The independent 100-sequence members who were originally ranked 88th, 89th, and 90th were allowed to participate in the assessment. Although it was a little against the rules, Yan Ling, Kai Hua, and Yu Changjian were independent 100-sequence members after all. If he didn't drag down the other Highness's disciples, he would have led Yan Ling, Kai Hua, and Yu Changjian to kill Lu Yifan. What should the Radiance Federation do? Chapter 1691. When Spirit Chi professionals dueled, it didn't matter if they had good or bad intentions. There was always the possibility of an accident. If something happened to one of them, it might not necessarily be because the opponent's attack was too strong. It was also very likely that one side did not block it. If he could really kill Lu Yifan in such a public place, he would definitely be able to do so. The Radiance Federation was not in a position to say anything. Otherwise, in the Radiance Federation's territory, the Radiance Federation would intervene in the friendly match between the two states. He would definitely become the laughingstock of the Origin world and lose all of his prestige. By then, Radiance would have 3 Class 5 Creation Masters. Even if the Radiance Federation had one more Class 5 Creation Master, when the other federations mentioned the Radiance Federation, they wouldn't dare to mention it. He wouldn't be as respectful as before. Lu Yifan, the third-ranked Radiance envoy, would attend the Radiance 100-sequence test. It could be said that this was completely out of Qian Yu's expectations. Previously, Qian Yu was only thinking about how to drag Her Majesty's disciple into the water. However, he had never thought that he would be able to pull down the Radiance envoys. Although Qian Yu accepted Li Yang's conditions, he was still unable to accept them. But at the end of the day, he had to take risk. He wouldn't be as confident as he was against Lu Yifan. If he could win this friendly match, he would directly crush Lu Yifan to death. Even though he was unable to obtain the 7-star treasured tool promised by Li Yang. But when they returned to the Freedom Federation as the leader of the diplomatic mission, he would definitely be rewarded handsomely. Thinking of this, Qian Yu looked at Lu Yifan with greed in his eyes. It was as if Lu Yifan himself was a treasure trove. Qian Yu said after staring at Lu Yifan for a while. Then let's begin immediately. Hearing Qian Yu's words, their expressions changed in unison. These 3 people were Li Yang, Lin Yuan, and Yin Lin. Li Yang looked at Qian Yu gloomily. It could be said that Qian Yu changing his mind in private was equivalent to disrupting Li Yang's original plan. Or rather, it affected the cooperation between Li Yang and Renaissance second page. The cooperation with Revival second page was very important to Li Yang. If it was before, Qian Yu would have changed his decision at the last minute. Li Yang would definitely stop him. But now, the pity goddess had arrived. As the caretaker of the goddess of compassion, Qian Yu still had to give the goddess of compassion face. After confirming that he could not change his decision, Li Yang did not even look at second page Revival, who was at the back of the team. The cooperation between him and the second page of Revival had their own purposes. There was no interaction between them to know what the other party's goal was. It could be said that both sides were using each other, and there was no real friendship between them. Therefore, after weighing his own interests, Li Yang decisively abandoned the second page of Revival. Without seeing Li Yang, who was whipping sixth page, he felt uncertain. Up until now, Li Yang hadn't seen any traces of the 4 horsemen mentioned on the second page of the Revival. Li Yang decided to unilaterally stop the cooperation with Renaissance second page. He snorted in his heart. Second page of Revival, you're useless. Die. Li Yang's expression was abnormally stern as he clenched his fists tightly. After witnessing several sacred source lifeforms, Li Yang knew how terrifying their abilities were. A sacred source lifeform's abilities were beyond the Fae's abilities and exclusive skills. The combination of Fae abilities and exclusive skills could burst out with multiple times the power. Moreover, the Freedom Federation envoys had 3 sacred source lifeforms that could complement each other. The effect would definitely be multiplied. In fact, when the 3 sacred source lifeforms' abilities were unleashed, Luo Yunyang's eyes widened. The sacred source lifeform itself could restrict the opponent from a higher dimension and kill them. Lin Yuan's sacred source lifeform was very special. The sacred sword-wielding queen was formed by the fusion of 2 sacred source lifeforms. Without the fusion, Lin Yuan could use the sacred punishment sword's abilities to produce an attack that far exceeded his current grade. Lin Yuan had gotten the news from Yin Lin. After receiving the news, Lin Yuan had been thinking about how to deal with it. Fortunately, Gao Feng's sacred source lifeform had brought Lin Yuan good news. Lin Yuan might be strong, but he did not dare to be arrogant. He believed that he could be compared to the current Freedom Envoy. No matter how strong a fantasy breed Fae was, there was still a huge difference between it and a myth breed Fae. The Freedom Envoy was the Freedom Federation's top prodigy. Even the Freedom Federation could not produce such pure spirit chi and elemental energy. However, the nurturing of Faes could at least reach Zhong Zhe Gulang's standard. It was not that Lin Yuan did not dare to deal with it. Apart from himself and Gao Feng, Li Nao, Zhang Zihao, and the others had performed amazingly in the test. They did not even have a diamond/fantasy breed Fae. When it came to a real battle, they would only be cannon fodder. Lin Yuan and Qian Yu could not guarantee that they could protect Gao Feng. Lin Yuan had not told the Moon Empress about Yan Ling, Kai Hua, and Yu Changjian's situation. He had only told her about the Freedom Federation's conspiracy. Lin Yuan made up his mind. He had to think of a way to change the situation. Yin Lin's brows were furrowed even tighter than Lin Yuan's. Yin Lin had been thinking of a plan. That way, more of Her Majesty's disciples could come and help Lin Yuan. However, Qian Yu had blocked off this path. With Yin Lin's experience, she naturally knew how terrifying it was when the 3 sacred source lifeforms' abilities were linked. Sensing that the situation was not in Lin Yuan's favor, Yin Lin stood up. Lin Yuan said, "The friendly match is quite interesting. I'm even thinking of participating in it. However, since it is a friendly match, fairness is the most important. From what I know, Qian Yu, the 9 people you brought are not from sequence 91 to 100 of the Independent 100. They are from 88 to 97. Among them, 3 of them are the lucky ones of your Freedom Federation who have received the favor of His Majesty. From what I know, there is only one Her Majesty's disciple from 91 to 100 of the Radiance 100 sequence. That is Gao Feng, who is ranked 92. An unfair duel can't be considered a friendly match." Yin Lin's words could be said to have stripped away Qian Yu's conspiracy and laid it bare on the table. This caused Qian Yu's expression to change. Qian Yu said this because he was not afraid. The Radiance Federation did not accept his proposal. Even if the Radiance Federation knew that he did not bring sequence 91 to 100 of the Independent 100, they were still newcomers. If the Radiance Federation wanted to maintain its magnanimity, it would not fuss over such a small matter. The news that Yan Ling, Kai Hua, and Yu Changjian were favored by the Freedom Federation. This was the chip that the Freedom Federation had thrown out at the sea to rope in the Azure Federation. It was confidential. The Radiance Federation's Majesty did not know. Now that Yin Lin had thrown it out, there was a third party involved. The Radiance Federation did not need to care about the so-called magnanimity. Instead, it was the Freedom Federation who was playing tricks. Chapter 1692. Qian Yu stared intently at Yin Lin. When he had personally approached her, he had been rejected. Could it be that the Azure Federation's envoys had intended to stand on the Radiance Federation's side from the start? However, was this folk prescription Lin's own attitude, or the Azure Federation's? Since the identities of Lin, Kai Hua, and Yu Changjian had been thrown out on the table, Qian Yu could only give up the idea of bringing Yanling, Kai Hua, and Yu Changjian to kill Lu Yifan. Lin's words were the truth. However, no matter what, Qian Yu could not agree to Lin's words. Our Freedom Federation has many people who are favored by Her Holiness. Being favored by Her Holiness does not mean anything. The people in my team are this year's new members of the Radiance 100 sequence, just like Gao Feng is Her Holiness' disciple. Didn't he also participate in the Radiance 100 sequence selection? While speaking, Qian Yu looked at the team. A youth with short, milky white hair who looked like a Shota thought to himself. Her Holiness Na had nurtured this youth for 20 years. Now, he had the same world calamity phaseless beast as Her Holiness Na. Looking at this Shota with short, milky white hair, Qian Yu was rather fearful. Originally, Qian Yu did not intend to let this Shota with long, milky white hair appear. Every time the world calamity phaseless beast reincarnated, it would confuse people's minds. Moreover, this young man had contracted one of the 7 great devils in the Devil's Cathedral. It must be known that not everyone in the Freedom Federation could form a contract with a greater devil. The 3 archdevils who had made a pact with him were now qualified to call themselves gods. Only the Freedom Federation's Holiness and the Freedom Envoys knew of this youth's existence. Even though Yanling, Kai Hua, and Yu Changjian were Her Holiness' disciples, they did not know about this white-haired Shota's situation. With this white-haired Shota around, Qian Yu was full of confidence. Lan Sun finally understood what Lin meant when she said that he had to stand behind her no matter what. Lan Sun knew that Lin would be partial to the Radiance Federation, but he did not expect it to be so obvious. He really did not know what kind of bewitching drug the Moon Empress disciple had fed Lin. However, the fact that Lin had contracted 2 sacred source lifeforms could not be exposed no matter what. This was the Azure Federation 2 years later. It was one of the trump cards for the Assembly of 10,000 Nations. Lan Sun immediately communicated with Lin through his mental strength. Lord Azure Envoy, if you want to help the Radiance Federation, I can completely stand on your side. However, no matter what, you cannot participate in this dispute. As long as you don't personally take part, I will support any decision you make. Lin's expression froze when she heard Lan Sun's words. Lan Sun was Lin's teacher, even though Lan Sun usually called her Lord Azure Envoy. However, Lin knew that it was because of Lan Sun's concern for her. At the same time, he also knew that Lan Sun did not agree to his participation because of the Azure 100 sequence members behind him. Because there were no special preparations, there were 3 people favored by His Majesty in the Freedom Federation's diplomatic mission today. In the last 10 of the Radiance 100 sequence, 2 of His Holiness's disciples were different. Lin muttered to herself, since he could not personally enter the battlefield and fight alongside Black. At the very least, he had to make the Radiance Federation send 2 more His Holiness disciples. At that moment, the Star Web audience and the candidates standing in the Radiance Sacred Hall. Even those with slow reactions could smell a thick smell of gunpowder. They knew that the current situation was not ordinary. It was like the 3 major federations were wrestling with each other. At the same time, Lin and Qian Yu's words had exposed Gao Feng's identity twice. The candidates and the audience finally knew why Gao Feng was so powerful. It turned out that Gao Feng was His Holiness Cicada Cry's disciple. No wonder. Back then, several platycodon flowers had bloomed in the sky of the Radiance Federation. Streams of lava had descended. It could be said that the Freedom Federation and the Radiance Federation had formed an unresolvable hatred. The Azure Federation and the Radiance Federation had always been allies. Now, Lin had stood up and exposed the Freedom Federation's contradiction. This made many Star Web audience pay attention to Lin, the Azure Envoy. At the same time, he had a good impression of Lin, the Azure Envoy. Lin muttered to herself for a moment and said, "A friendly match must be fair to be interesting. A friendly match must be fair to be interesting. The Radiance Federation only has one His Holiness disciple. How about pulling 2 more His Holiness disciples into the battlefield? Then, just like your Freedom Federation, eliminate the last 3 people in the 100 sequence. It will be fair if both sides have a team of 10. A 3-way battle. I think you don't want to see it, Qianyu. I don't want to be the one swinging in the middle either. So, I'll add some fun. I'll take out a unique Lantis mystic realm, a sea demon that was born with the water of life. Whichever side wins, apart from the 2 Federation envoys, the most outstanding member of the winning side will get this sea demon." Lin's words made Lan Sun's face reveal a bitter smile. The Azure Federation's Lantis mystic realm, the Radiance Federation's desolate mystic realm, and the Freedom Federation's Devil Church. They were all mystic realms of the same level. The things produced inside were extremely precious. The sea demon that Lin promised to be born with the water of life. It was comparable to the middle-rank demon in the Devil Church. Lan Sun was even more confused. What did Lin Yuan and Lin talk about in the Fey car? As soon as Lin said that, the white-haired boy in the Freedom Federation's team, there was a strange look on his face. It was as if the sea demon that had awakened the water of life was already in his pocket. The Radiance Holiness, who was standing on the golden stone pillar, had a moved look on his face. They didn't expect Lin to take out such a thing for the Radiance Federation. At this moment, the Moon Empress said, "This palace will also take out a true desolate grade desolate bloodline spiritual object. It will also be given to the candidate with the best performance, apart from the 2 Federation envoys." As soon as the Moon Empress' voice fell, the pitiful god's voice sounded. "True desolate bloodline Fey and a sea demon that has awakened the water of life. Interesting. In that case, I will take out a middle-rank demon that was born in the Devil Church." Speaking of this, the pitiful god paused and then changed the topic. "I can take out a great demon and give it to the winner with the best performance, apart from the 2 Federation envoys. However, I have a request." Speaking of this, the pitiful god looked at Lin Yuan. She said with a curious face, "You are less than 19 years old and already have such strength. I'm very interested in you. I'll give you a chance to reach the sky in 1 step. Be my caretaker. How about it?" Chapter 1693. For some reason, the goddess of compassion's gaze always fell on Black. The goddess of compassion's vision was extremely high, and her mind was never on cultivating the younger generation. Not to mention that Black did not show all of his strength in the battle. For the goddess of compassion, who had awakened and grasped the birth matrix, Black showed all of his strength. It was really nothing. Therefore, the goddess of compassion's gaze fell on Black had nothing to do with whether Black was outstanding or not. Moreover, the goddess of compassion was indeed obsessed with appearances, and she was a very experienced existence among them. In addition to improving her strength, gathering resources, and grasping power, the goddess of compassion's greatest hobby was to collect beautiful things. The other majesties of the Freedom Federation would choose to cultivate some lovely and rare fays when they obtained them. However, the goddess of compassion would not cultivate these lovely fays. Instead, she would make these fays into specimens and display them in her palace. Compared to the beauty of vitality, the goddess of compassion preferred the beauty of death. The beauty of death was more worthy of repeated observation. In the early years, the goddess of compassion spent resources to cultivate a team of 200 people. Everyone in these teams, after comprehending the willpower rune, was required to contract fairy source-type lifeforms. Once these people contracted fairy source-type lifeforms and advanced them into fantasy breeds, they would be able to enter fantasy breed. The goddess of compassion would directly kill these fairies that had completely revealed their bodies and characteristics. She would seal the fairy bloodline in the fairies' bodies. She would make these dead fairy source-type lifeforms into dolls. Then, she would hang hundreds of dolls made of fairy source-type lifeforms on the rotating wind chimes in front of the palace. Looking from afar, there were hundreds and thousands of fairies dancing in the air. But the real situation was that all the fairies were meticulously made into handicraft. Those teams cultivated by the goddess of compassion died because of their main phase. Their minds were damaged and they became useless. Without exception, these people were all arranged by the goddess of compassion to go to the swamp world. They were sent to the swamp world to work as coolies. The goddess of compassion's exquisite and beautiful core was killing and cruelty. The goddess of compassion's willful personality made all the majesties weaker than the goddess of compassion in the Freedom Federation quite afraid of her. Just like Li Su standing next to the goddess of compassion. The goddess of compassion had always done things without any taboos. If his opinion was different from the goddess of compassion, even if goddess Lien did not kill him, she would definitely fight him. Back in the demon church, goddess of mercy clearly had the opportunity to contract the second of the 7 greater demons. However, the second one was not as good-looking as the third one. Thus, Goddess Lien decisively gave up on the second beast that was stronger and had greater potential, and chose the third beast instead. It could be said that Lien Shen's obsession with good looks had almost reached the point of insanity. Black was now wearing a silver mask on his face. It was impossible to tell from his appearance, even if his temperament was exceptional and his physique was outstanding. But for someone who was obsessed with good looks, the combination of temperament and bone structure was not as important as one's looks. Lien Shen felt that she shouldn't be looking at a young man. However, when Lien Shen tried to avert her gaze, she found that her gaze would be involuntarily drawn to him. In fact, Lien Shen even felt a sense of intimacy and excitement that came from her bloodline. It was difficult for a pity goddess to be interested in a person or thing. Now, he was indeed interested in Black. That was why Goddess Lien dared to say this in the Hui Yao's territory. In the Radiance Federation, apart from that old man, no one had the right to call himself a god. At the level of grasping the life providence, the spirit chi professional would activate the life providence. He could already use a power similar to that of a god. He didn't just rely on phase to fight. This was also the main reason why the Lien God's fishtail was able to block the Bamboo Monarch's golden thread Emperor Bamboo Shadow. Lien Shen knew very well that if she were to fight with that old man, she would definitely die. Even if he couldn't take advantage of the old man, this elder would never be able to protect the Radiance Federation in his hands. An 11-star Sacred Source Lifeform and a 10-star Sacred Source Lifeform were on completely different levels. Although only one of his 2 Sacred Source Lifeforms had reached the 11-star level, it was still an 11-star Sacred Source Lifeform. However, if he used the 11-star Sacred Source Lifeform with all his might, he would be able to draw a circle with the distance between the royal capital and Lantern City. All living beings in the circle were destined to die. Apart from this old man, the Radiant Sex Moon Empress had adopted a heavenly favored spirit from the heaven-blessed mansion. At this time, his strength had already reached above the eternal realm. A favored spirit reaching the eternal realm and an ordinary spirit reaching the eternal realm were 2 completely different concepts. Given the relationship between the Moon Empress and the favored spirit, the Moon Empress would not be able to escape. If she were to make a move, the favored spirit would definitely help Hui Yao. If not for her misgivings, the Lien God wouldn't have needed to rope in Black in front of everyone. Instead, she had directly snatched Black over. Before Lin Yuan could react, the Lien God's words left her mouth. The Moon Empress' brows were already tightly knitted. She clenched her left fist. Song Yu and Mystic Moon, who were standing behind the Moon Empress, subconsciously thought, "This is bad." While the Moon Empress cared for Lin Yuan very much, she also had a desire to protect him that far exceeded that of an ordinary master and disciple. Mystic Moon and Song, you were afraid that the Moon Empress would directly attack the Lian God. They both knew that the Moon Empress had awakened her birth providence. She had also embarked on that path. Although the Lian God had embarked on that path nearly 10 years earlier than the Moon Empress. However, due to her bloodline, after the Lian God embarked on that path, her strength could no longer advance. Therefore, if they really fought, the Moon Empress should be able to fight evenly with the Lian God. However, if the Moon Empress really could not hold back her temper, it would definitely not be a good thing for Hui Yao. The expressions of the other 12 majesties also changed slightly. The gazes of the 12 majesties were not on the Moon Empress. However, they could feel the change in the Moon Empress aura. At that moment, in the direction of the silver stone pillar, a youth's cold voice echoed. Please get this clear. I am from the Radiance Federation. Besides, I have a master, and I will not become your caretaker. The youth's voice sounded very calmly. However, this voice shocked the entire Radiance Federation as it was being broadcasted live on the star web. In fact, as early as the Lian God had publicly roped in Lin Yuan, the star web had already exploded. Memory brush and ink. What the hell? The Freedom Federation's majesties are actually publicly roping in Black. Is Black's talent that strong? They are openly snatching geniuses from our Radiance Federation. A little Zhang's tears dry. Didn't you guys hear that Black's age is really less than 19 years old? Why does his age make me think of a person? Damn. If that's the case, isn't Black and Lin Yuan the same age? Wiping tiredness. The Freedom Federation's majesties are really disgusting. Is there no one else in the Freedom Federation? They actually want to openly seduce our Black. Dreaming of you. Didn't you guys see just now? The Freedom Envoy leading the Freedom Federation's team is the caretaker of the Freedom Federation's majesties. As long as Black agrees, he will ascend to the heavens in a single bound. Do you think Black can resist such temptation? 7017K. Chapter 1694. Maple Dance. You have to block it even if you can. As Black's diehard fan, if Black agrees, Black and I will be enemies. There was a frenzy of discussion on StarWeb. Black might have caused a shocking commotion during the Radiance 100 Sequences test, but he was not as powerful as before. However, how much of his strength had Black, who had been hiding in the Yellow Sand Castle the entire time, revealed? The Freedom Federation's invitation was equivalent to Black not showing his full strength. It affirmed Black's innate talent. After all, it was not the first time the Freedom Federation's envoys had come to the Radiance 100 sequence test. However, such a situation had never happened before. Before the Star Web's netizens could discuss for long, Black had already given his answer. The sentence, "I'm from the Radiance Federation," indicated Black's attitude. It also caused all the netizens to be excited. The words Radiance Federation seemed to be able to go straight into people's blood. It evoked an endless power. Then, Black said that he had a teacher and straightforwardly rejected the Freedom Federation's invitation. Whether Black's teacher could be compared to the Freedom Federation's majesty. Black's attitude toward the Freedom Federation's majesty was worthy of those passers-by who had no thoughts about Black before to become his fans. Infatuated Dream Star Ocean. Black, well done. As long as I still have a breath left, I will support you for life. Dawn. I've heard people on StarWeb saying that they have different opinions about Black being the leader of the Radiance Federation's younger generation. Strength isn't the only standard to represent the younger generation, but now I feel that Black is indeed qualified to represent the Radiance Federation's younger generation. Little Scholar. Black's "I'm from the Radiance Federation" makes me want to drink 2 bottles of wine for some reason. Shui, aren't you curious about who Black's teacher is? This is the first time I've heard Black say that he has a teacher in public. Black's words aroused the StarWeb's netizens' blood. This caused Lian Xin to frown. The pity god thought that she would be angry and have killing intent toward Black. However, she realized that she couldn't have killing intent toward Black. In fact, after being rejected by Black, she wanted to get close to Black even more. The compassionate goddess was shocked when she realized what she was thinking. He didn't know why he felt as if he had been bewitched out of the blue. If he was really charmed, it would be easy and understandable for him to have a good impression of someone. However, this was clearly not the case. The Moon Empress had been suppressing the anger and killing intent in her heart. As Hui Yao's holiness, the Moon Empress knew that she shouldn't attack Goddess Lian. Before the Radiance 100 sequence ended, in order to lure out the members of the 2 pages of the Pagoda Canon, he had to hide his strength. However, the Pity Goddess dared to have designs on Lin Yuan, and the Moon Empress felt that she couldn't swallow this anger no matter what. Lin Yuan's words were like a good medicine. The Moon Empress' anger and killing intent had yet to dissipate. However, Lin Yuan's words warmed the Moon Empress' heart. The Moon Empress took a deep breath and loosened her clenched fists. The Freedom Federation and the Pagoda Canon were going to make a big move against the Republic of Radiant. Right now, wasn't Hui Yao also playing a big game of chess? Lan Sun could sense the intense tension between the Freedom Federation and the Radiance Federation. He couldn't help but feel that he was unlucky. Lan Sun wasn't afraid that the Freedom Federation and the Radiance Federation would really fight. The Azure Federation had always been neutral. If the 2 sides really fought, it would affect the Azure Federation's trade. However, neither side would lose their heads and really make a move against the Azure Federation. No matter which side the Azure Federation helped, it would tilt the originally balanced scales. However, the Azure Federation could no longer stay out of this conflict. This was because Yin Lin had publicly expressed her support for the Radiance Federation. She didn't even hesitate to expose Freedom Envoy Qian Yu's conspiracy. Lan Sun promised to stand on Yin Lin's side. Since the tension had already risen, in order to not let the 2 sides use force, Lan Sun decided to let the 2 sides compete on the stage. Since the 2 of your federations plan to let the younger generation fight, each of you will send a federation envoy. How about this? I'll be the banker and carry out a bet. The 2 federations can each support their own federation's team. Each federation will send 2 holiness to carry out the bet. No matter how many resources are bet on their own federation's team, the loser will have to compensate the winner with the corresponding resources. In addition, I'll take out 3 additional top-notch mutant waters as a gift from the banker to the winning side. When the Pity Goddess publicly recruited Black, Li Su knew that it was not good. He might have unilaterally cancelled the cooperation with the Pagoda Canon. However, if the situation changed too much according to the original plan, the 2nd page revival was not stupid and would definitely be able to see the clues. In that case, it would not be good. He could unilaterally cancel the cooperation with the 2nd page revival, but he still had to borrow the 2nd page revival's strength. If the 2nd page revival found out that something was wrong, he would not be able to borrow the strength. Li Su didn't know what the Pity Goddess was thinking. She didn't even care about the Federation's geniuses. Now, she had come to the Radiance Federation to rope in other people's geniuses and was rejected. Li Su didn't know if the Pity Goddess felt ashamed. Anyway, at this moment, Li Su felt that she had lost all her face. Lan Sun's current proposal could just stabilize the situation. There wouldn't be any more changes. It would break her original plan. At the thought of this, Li Su was the first to respond. I'll bet on 10 island whales, 3 of which have strategic grades of S rank. In addition, I'll add 1,000 tons of spiritual materials from Myth Breed phase. Li Su's bet made all the candidates, including the Star Web viewers, open their mouth. 10 island whales and 1,000 tons of spiritual materials produced from Myth Breed phase. What kind of wealth was this? If one wanted to cultivate an adult island whale after synthesizing radiance dollars, the expenditure of radiance dollars had to be measured in units of trillions. There were many types of Myth Breed phase, big and small. However, only the core of myth breed phase could be called spiritual materials. It had medicinal value and could be used by creation masters. Even if 1,000 tons were all from large myth breed phase, it would require at least 300 of them. An ordinary person simply couldn't understand such wealth. Moreover, among the 10 island whales, 3 of them had strategic grades of S-rank. The value of an S-rank island whale was often twice that of an ordinary island whale. Before everyone could sigh with emotion, a cold voice rang out. "Aren't you ashamed to take out this little thing as a bet?" Chapter 1695. When the Moon Empress had publicly roped him in, the anger in her heart had surged. Although it was for the sake of the overall situation, for the sake of her responsibility, the Moon Empress had forcibly suppressed the anger in her heart. However, the unhappy Moon Empress still needed a place to vent. Right now, Li Su was the best place for her to vent. Li Su's face stiffened when he heard the Moon Empress' words. 10 island whales and 1,000 tons of spiritual materials from myth breed phase were definitely not a small amount of resources. Taking out this amount of resources might not be enough to hurt Li Su. However, Li Su was not a creation master. It was impossible for him to have more resources than the Moon Empress. As soon as the Moon Empress opened her mouth, Li Su knew what she meant. The Moon Empress was going to use resources to suppress him. However, Li Su, who understood the Moon Empress' thoughts, did not feel angry. Instead, he was abnormally happy. In Li Su's opinion, there were 2 insurances in his team. There was no possibility of losing. The more things the Moon Empress was willing to take out, the more he would earn. This time, Nana was willing to send her precious disciple over. She wanted him to bring her out to be gilded. Given Nana's love for her disciple, she should have at least 5 treasured artifacts. In Li Su's opinion, there was no need for Nana's disciple, Lu O, to use his full strength. With just Yan Ling, Kai Hua, and Yu Changjian working together with Qianyu, they could defeat the younger generation of Hui Yao. It could be said that the Freedom Federation's younger generation had emerged in recent years. They were the most talented batch in the past 100 years. Li Su, who had confidence in his heart, said in a clear voice, "The Moon Empress is indeed a Class 5 creation master. You have accumulated a lot of resources. You don't even fancy 10 island whales and 1,000 tons of myth breed spiritual materials. In this case, no matter how many resources you take out, I will follow." The Moon Empress' expression did not change at all. However, her cold voice was tainted with a trace of mockery. "Li Su, this Empress remembers that the middle-rank devil you contracted has been promoted to the great devil level. It has shed a Satan's seed. This Empress will take out 20 island whales, 3 of which can reach S-rank, 2,000 tons of myth breed spiritual materials and 50 tons of creation breed spiritual materials, 500 law crystals and 50 world crystals, and 10 tempered undying bodies. I don't need your resources. You only need to take out that Satan's seed as collateral." When Li Su heard the Moon Empress' words, his expression immediately turned strange. The seed of Satan was an evil spirit with the bloodline of a great devil. It could only condense one seed in its lifetime. The seed of Satan was mainly used for inheritance. It could allow other devils to absorb the seed of Satan. He would have the opportunity to comprehend the power contained within the seed of Satan. A devil could only fuse with one Satan's seed in its lifetime. The devil that Li Fan had formed a contract with, the seed of Satan. It was something that even the other overlords of the Freedom Federation coveted. This was because the devil that Li Su had contracted had very special abilities. Even though the other majesties had mentioned several times that they wanted to exchange for Li Sun's seed of Satan, Li Yuandu did not agree. Months later, there was no contract with the devil produced from the devil's church. What was the use of the seed of Satan? The Moon Empress had taken out 10 more island whales than him, 1,000 tons of myth breed spiritual materials and 50 tons of creation breed spiritual materials, 500 law crystals and 50 world crystals. There were also 10 cleansed immortal bodies. These resources were easy to obtain. With Li Su's strength, as long as he was willing to spend time, he could obtain all of these. However, things like law crystals, world crystals, and cleansed immortal bodies, these were things that Li Su could not obtain through himself. Because every single person in the Freedom Federation cared about their own personal interests. It was the same for the overlords. Every time there was a worship in the Freedom Temple, the chairs that the Creation Masters of the Freedom Federation sat on, they were all different from the chairs that the other overlords sat on. The Class 5 Creation Masters of the Freedom Federation enjoyed far better treatment than the regular overlords. The Goddess of Mercy was a Class 5 Creation Master. Every time Li Su begged the Goddess of Mercy to obtain a batch of Creation Master resources, the Goddess of Mercy would take away a large batch of resources from Li Su. This amount of resources was even more than the Mother Goddess Federation, the Sand Continent Federation, the Storm Federation, the Haedong Federation, and the other federations that had Class 5 Creation Masters. If he traded with the other federations' Class 5 Creation Masters, he would have to take out even more resources. As a result, the Freedom Federation's overlords would basically be in contact with other large federations that had Class 5 Creation Masters. There was a deep connection. The preciousness of the Class 5 Creation Master resources made Li Su especially covet the resources that the Moon Empress offered. Under normal circumstances, Li Su would not use the Satan's Seed as a bet no matter what. However, after feeling that the Radiance Federation's side had no chance of winning, Li Su decided to accept it. He recalled that this was the Radiance Federation, and any negotiation or bet in the Radiance Federation, it was impossible to give him an absolute guarantee. Thinking of this, Li Su took out his Satan's Seed. The moment a black-purple crystal appeared in Li Su's palm, an evil and ominous aura quickly gushed out. Since Lan Sun is the banker, both sides will hand over the resources to Lan Sun. In the end, Lan Sun will hand over the resources to the winning side. Upon hearing Li Su's words, the Moon Empress took out a moonstone that was polished into a moon-shaped pendant. This moonstone pendant contains the resources that I mentioned. After speaking, the Moon Empress threw the moonstone pendant at Lan Sun. Since Lan Sun had proposed to be the banker, he was naturally prepared to help both sides accept the bet. The bet between the Moon Empress and Li Su made the other 12 eminences of the Radiance Federation look at each other. From the Moon Empress meaning, she was certain that her disciple could defeat the Freedom Federation's envoy team. He could also obtain the middle-rank devil that the Pity Goddess had taken out. The Moon Empress was now trading the Devil's Seed in Li Su's hands. It was for when Lin Yuan formed a contract with that middle-rank devil, he would be able to use it. It would give that middle-rank devil a chance to obtain a new ability. It could be said that the Moon Empress had made sufficient plans for Lin Yuan. However, did the Moon Empress really believe that he could defeat the members of the Freedom Federation's envoy team? The Freedom Federation's envoy team had insisted on challenging, so they must have the confidence to win. Although the Radiance Federation's side had already prepared for it during the competition, many majesties weren't completely unprepared for the possibility of losing. A few of the Star Web viewers had temporarily lost the ability to think. They learned that the Moon Empress and the Freedom Federation's eminence were carrying out a shocking bet. 7017K. Chapter 1696. Ordinary people who had never even heard of the island whale. He had no idea what the Moon Empress was talking about. However, he also knew that these things should be very valuable. Pity the Moon Empress and Li Su had made such a huge bet. His interest was piqued and he said, "There should be many uncontracted fairy source-type lifeforms in the Radiance Federation's treasury, right? I want 300 uncontracted fairy source-type lifeforms. For this, I can give you 150 sets of Fey bloodlines." Apart from that, I will also take out 200 different insect-type carcinoma phase and 5,000 bronze/epic phase. 100 bronze/legend phase as the wager. I don't know what your radiance can take out to bet with me. As soon as the Lien god's words left her mouth, the star web exploded. The island whale was a mythical and creation breed spiritual material. It was too unfamiliar to the ordinary audience. However, bronze/epic phase and bronze/legend phase were rare. It was closely related to low-ranked spirit chi professionals. Everyone knew how expensive a bronze/epic phase was. They cost 3,000 to 45 million radiance dollars each. 5,000 of them were equivalent to a gamble of 200 billion radiance dollars. A bronze/epic phase was a legendary existence. This kind of thing had always existed in legends. At that time, Chu Si had revealed her bronze/fantasy breed Iron Wild Bull. That was why he was once known as the Radiance Sex #1 genius. Maple Snowy Night. What? 5,000 bronze/epic phase. 100 bronze/legend phase. What kind of phase is this? Oh my god. My head is a little dizzy now. I can't think of anything that's as valuable as these spiritual items. Guan Haotian, Mom asked me why I was kneeling. I also want to know why. It's just that you can't control your knees. Peace is a blessing. For the Freedom Federation to be willing to take out such a large amount of resources, just how confident are they? The Moon Empress and the Freedom Federation's Her Majesty are both so confident. Do you guys think we can win, or they can win? Glassheart. Such a huge bet to bet on the victory of this competition. I think Lord Lu Yifan, Black, and Gao Feng will probably fight with their lives on the line. After a short period of shock, the Star Web audience had completely realized that the current situation was different. In the past, many people had naively thought that the Freedom Federation had proposed a friendly match because they wanted to wrestle with the Radiance Federation before the 2-year promise. But now that the stakes were out, no one would be so naive to think that way. After all, no matter what, it was impossible for him to lose these priceless items to the other party so easily. Moreover, the Radiance and the Freedom Federation's relationship wasn't good at all. The Star Web audience's original mentality of watching a good show had already turned into anger when Lu Yifan, the Radiance envoy, had been pulled down. But now, his anger had completely turned into anxiety and heaviness. Regardless of victory or defeat, there would be heroes risking their lives and bleeding for the Radiance Federation. The reason why Goddess Lien proposed such a bet was mainly because she wanted to exchange some of the resources in her hands. The Pity Goddess was interested in collecting fairy source-type lifeforms and turning them into dolls. Therefore, the Pitiful Goddess wanted to obtain more fairy source-type lifeforms that she did not have. He took out the 150 fairy bloodlines and gave them to the fairy source-type lifeforms. There would be a chance to upgrade the fairy source-type lifeform's bloodline. Of course, this method of using the fairy bloodline to induce the fairy's own bloodline to upgrade. It was usually the most effective method for the first time. 150 sets of fairy bloodlines were required to enhance the fairy bloodline once. The carcinoma phase had always been the Pity Goddess's little toys. The Pity Goddess had done plenty of experiments with the carcinoma phase. Among them, the Pity Goddess had always felt that the insect-type carcinoma phase were the ugliest. Therefore, she wanted to use the insect-type carcinoma phase to exchange for some animal-type or plant-type carcinoma phase. As for the legend and epic phase, the Pity Goddess didn't need to take them out. However, since the Moon Empress was using such a method to suppress Li Su and destroy the Freedom Federation's prestige, the Pity Goddess didn't mind destroying the Radiance Federation's prestige. The Pity Goddess's Class 5 Creation Master standard was extremely high. During the Creation Master contest, the Pity Goddess had easily won against the Bamboo Monarch. The Pity Goddess had easily won against the Bamboo Monarch. The Pity Goddess had taken out so many Creation Master resources. On one hand, it was to put the Radiance Federation in a difficult position. On the other hand, she wanted to use this opportunity to harvest more. However, the Pity Goddess's plan had failed. Before anyone else could say anything, the Moon Empress had already spoken. This Empress shall accept such a wager. The fairy bloodline that you mentioned can be used to exchange for the fairy source-type lifeforms. However, it is a little too greedy for you to take out 200 insect-type carcinoma phase to exchange for other carcinoma phase. The quantity of insect-type carcinoma phase is the highest among the carcinoma phase. The value is far inferior to the animal-type and plant-type carcinoma phase. I will not use the carcinoma phase to exchange for the 200 insect-type carcinoma phase. However, the items that I want to take out aren't enough for the wager. I will need another 5,000 bronze/epic phase. And 150 fairy bloodlines. When the Pity Goddess heard the Moon Empress' words, she frowned slightly. However, her heart was filled with interest. What exactly was the Moon Empress taking out? The price was comparable to 150 sets of Demon Bloodline, 10,000 bronze/epic phase, 100 bronze/legend phase, and 200 insect species carcinoma phase. This amount of resources was equivalent to a Class 5 Creation Master's work for over a year. He wanted to hire a Class 5 Creation Master for a year and make him work day and night. There was probably no one in the world who dared to think like that. After all, Class 5 Creation Masters were the wealthiest people in the world. Moon Empress, if you can take out something that satisfies me, I don't mind gambling with you. 5,000 bronze/legend phase and 150 sets of demon bloodlines are nothing to me. The Moon Empress replied calmly. If I take out a pure eternal heart, you will definitely agree. The Moon Empress had already decided to publicly reveal her identity as a Class 6 Creation Master. The entire dispute with the Freedom Federation would definitely spread throughout the origin world. This was the best time for the Moon Empress to define a Class 6 Creation Master. Once the battle with the Freedom Federation's envoy was over, Lin Yuan's identity as his disciple would be made known to the world. At that time, no matter how dazzling Lin Yuan was, once his identity as a Class 6 Creation Master was revealed, he would not be able to escape. It could also make everyone's gazes fall on him. It even made those who had ulterior motives against Lin Yuan somewhat fearful. 7017K. Chapter 1697. The other 12 lords of the Radiance Federation already knew that the Moon Empress could purify the Eternal Heart. By due search, however, he was still very surprised by the Moon Empress' words. No one expected the Moon Empress to appear at this time. He wanted to show the entire origin world that his Creation Master standard had improved. Before the duel, the Moon Empress attracted the Pity God and Li Su's gazes to her. It weakened Lin Yuan's existence. It could be said that he had put a lot of thought into it. However, this wasn't the only benefit of doing so. At the same time, he could also see how Lian Xin and Li Su would react after learning of this matter. According to the duo's reaction, he would be able to deduce and investigate the Freedom Federation's Creation Master's standard. Would he be able to reach this level? In the conflict between the Radiance Federation and the Freedom Federation, the Radiance Federation had always been the weaker party. After all, the Radiance Federation was only established after the Moon Empress became a Class 5 Creation Master. Only then did they begin to compete with the Freedom Federation and the Azure Federation for the three great federations. Before the Moon Empress became a Class 5 Creation Master, the Radiance Federation only had 2 Class 5 Creation Masters. Compared to the Freedom Federation and the Azure Federation, there was still a certain gap. The number of Class 5 Creation Masters would determine the number of Pinnacle Creation Master resources in the Federation. This batch of top-notch Creation Master resources would eventually evolve into an extremely formidable combat power. It could be said that the relatively weak Radiance Federation was on equal footing with the Freedom Federation previously. They would not be at a disadvantage in the conflict. First, it was because of unity. Secondly, it was because the old man sitting on the rattan chair had acted as a protective umbrella when the Moon Empress, Night-leaning Moon, and the others had just set off. Although the old man and the Moon Empress had also reached that level of strength, they did not address themselves as gods. However, at its core, it served as a deterrent to the Freedom Federation. When Lien Shun heard the Moon Empress words, she looked at the Moon Empress in disbelief. Your creation master standard has actually broken through to that stage. I can purify the eternal heart now. As she spoke, the Mercy God's expression turned gloomy. The Radiance Federation's 13 lords and Lan Sun were stunned by the Compassion God's words. Through the meaning of the legend of compassion, he immediately understood. The Freedom Federation already had someone like the Moon Empress who could purify the eternal heart. From the expression on Goddess Lien's face, everyone knew. The Class 5 Creation Master that could purify the eternal heart was not the compassionate goddess herself. Lan Sun sighed in his heart. He didn't expect that the bet he proposed would reveal such useful information. If a Class 5 Creation Master that could purify the eternal heart appeared in the Freedom Federation and the Radiance Federation, these two Class 5 Creation Masters could simply address themselves as Class 6 Creation Masters. A new era of Creation Masters. The purified eternal heart could help experts who had reached the eternal realm take another step forward. Someone who stood above the eternal realm. In the past, the Azure Federation and the Freedom Federation stood side by side. The Radiance Federation's latecomers were catching up. Now, it was a battle between the Freedom Federation and the Radiance Federation. The Azure Federation had fallen behind in terms of top-notch Creation Master resources. In the Azure Federation, no Class 5 Creation Master would be able to break through to such a level within a short period of time. When the Freedom Federation and the Radiance Federation truly wrestled with each other, the Azure Federation would no longer be able to maintain their neutrality. Thinking of this, Lan Sun sighed. Today's dispute was like the foreshadowing of the official opening of the battlefront between the two federations. From the very beginning, Lin had participated in this battle. He was standing on the Radiance Federation's side. If the conflict really erupted today, it would be because of Lin's choice. The Azure Federation might only be able to obtain the greatest benefits by leaning towards the Radiance Federation. Regardless of which side the Azure Federation leaned towards, the Freedom Federation or the Radiance Federation, the most important thing was to think about how to obtain the pure eternal heart. This was the world's top-notch Creation Master resource. The Freedom Federation valued individual benefit. If the Azure Federation wanted to discuss cooperation with the Freedom Federation, they could only discuss with the Freedom Federation's majesties. When discussing cooperation with the Radiance Federation, the Majesty's will was a whole entity. Therefore, it would undoubtedly be easier to discuss cooperation with the Radiance Federation. There was no need to deal with many parties. The pure eternal heart was something that could be provided to the Azure Federation by any party. After all, the Azure Federation's experts who used the pure eternal heart to break through to the eternal realm would have to swear on their fate. There was nothing wrong with that. The Azure Federation would provide high-class Creation Master resources to the other federations. They would also request for it. When the Origin world was about to be in turmoil, only by possessing formidable strength. Only then would they be able to protect themselves in the chaotic situation. A year ago, many of the federations that had Class 5 Creation Masters had already started to have dispute. Furthermore, the conflict seemed to be expanding continuously. If the Azure Federation and the Radiance Federation formed an alliance, and the Radiance Federation was willing to provide the pure eternal heart to them, no matter what request the other party had, it could be considered a kind of favor. Of course, the specific situation would have to wait until they brought the news back to the Azure Federation. The 12 Class 5 Azure Federation families would hold a meeting to jointly decide. The expression on Li Su's face had also changed drastically. Standing at the back of the Freedom Federation's envoys was the second page of Revival. Originally, he was still frowning and calculating the current situation. He was thinking about the purpose of whipping the sixth page. But after knowing that the Moon Empress could purify the pure eternal heart, the second page of Revival's parasitic body suddenly shook slightly. Immediately after, the grayish-black eyes suddenly turned purplish-black. In these purplish-black eyes, there was a reflection of the light in the eyes. It was as if there were two black candles burning with purplish-black light. Under the halo, inside a black coffin, the sleeping beauty slowly opened her eyes. There was a girl-next-door doll hanging on this woman's neck. Behind the doll, there were two pairs of gray wings, full of deathly stillness. It was as if it was announcing death. After a while, the body stopped trembling. The eyes became grayish-black again. It was just that a black candle totem quietly climbed on the chest of this body, which was shrouded under the robe. This figure took a step forward and walked to the middle of the few youths in front. An extremely elegant smile appeared on the originally ordinary face. It was as if the aristocrats from 1,000 years ago were sitting in the sky garden in a leisurely afternoon. They were preparing to taste the sweet tea brewed with peerless fruit. The Moon Empress alone accepted the bet of the Goddess of Mercy and Li Su. This itself was a very morale-boosting behavior. After the Goddess of Mercy and the Moon Empress handed over the resources as the bet to Lan Sun again. Lan Sun was looking at the spatial equipment containing the Goddess of Mercy's bet. After just one look, he looked away. He saw the new moonstone pendant that the Moon Empress threw over. Lan Sun looked at it obsessively for a long time before he opened his mouth. Instant Beast Evolution Quotient. Please bookmark this site so that you can read it online the next time there is an update. The mobile version of the first complete book was updated the fastest.